My mother-in-law took my birthday cake. Should I apologize? So last weekend was my 30th birthday, and I thought I'd finally celebrate it in a way that felt special. My husband, Adam, and I had been planning a small dinner at our house with a few close friends and family. Nothing huge, just good food, some drinks, and a cake I'd been looking forward to for weeks. That cake might sound like a small thing, but it wasn't. It was a custom chocolate hazelnut cake from this bakery I've loved since college. I'd saved up to get it because their cakes are that good. I even picked it up myself the day before the party, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in the fridge with a little sticky note that said, "Do not touch birthday cake." Now, to understand why this matters so much, you need to know a bit about my mother-in-law, Linda. She's a handful. She's one of those people who thinks everything revolves around her. She'll show up to our house uninvited, move things around because she doesn't like clutter, and constantly makes backhanded comments about my cooking or decorating choices. She's not a bad person, just incredibly self-absorbed. The day of the party, I was in a great mood. The food was ready, the table was set, and our friends were arriving. Adam's parents showed up last, carrying a big box. I thought maybe she brought something to contribute, but I didn't think much of it. After dinner, everyone started asking about the cake. I went to the fridge to grab it, and it was gone, completely gone. The spot where it had been sitting was empty. At first I thought maybe Adam moved it, but he looked just as confused as I was. Then I noticed the box Linda had brought earlier sitting on the counter. I opened it, and inside was a plain grocery store cake. White frosting, generic decorations, and a huge happy birthday. Linda, written across it. I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Apparently, earlier that day, she had decided to help out and took my cake to her house, because she didn't think it was enough for everyone. She said she cut a few slices for her friends, since they love that bakery too, and thought I wouldn't mind sharing. She then replaced it with the one she brought, because she thought it looked more festive. I was speechless. Like, who does that? I asked her why she thought it was okay to take someone else's birthday cake and eat part of it before the party even started. She shrugged and said I was overreacting, and that I should be grateful she brought another one. I could feel my face turning red. Everyone in the room was dead silent. I said something like, "You took my birthday cake for yourself, and now you want me to be thankful." She said I was being dramatic and that it was just dessert. I told her that it wasn't just about the cake. It was about the principle, that I'd spent time and money to make my birthday nice, and she just made it about herself again. She rolled her eyes and said, "You always find a way to make everything a fight." At that point, I just walked away. I couldn't even look at her. Adam followed me to the kitchen and tried to calm me down. He said he understood why I was upset, but he didn't want to make a big deal in front of everyone. I told him it was a big deal. It wasn't about food, it was about respect. We ended up serving the grocery store cake, and I couldn't even enjoy it. The whole mood of the party was off after that. People tried to lighten things up, but it was awkward. Linda acted like she was the victim, sighing loudly and saying things like, "I can't believe she's so sensitive over a cake." Later that night, after everyone left, Adam told me his mom called him crying. She said I embarrassed her, and that she was just trying to help. She told him I owed her an apology for yelling in front of people. I didn't even yell, I just called her out. Now Adam is stuck in the middle. He says he gets my side, but also doesn't want tension with his mom. He asked if I could just smooth things over by apologizing for how it came out. But honestly, I don't feel like I did anything wrong. I told him I'll apologize when she acknowledges what she did was disrespectful. He said she probably never will, because that's just how she is. And that's the part that really frustrates me, because somehow, every time she crosses a line, I'm expected to be the one who forgives, keeps the peace, and moves on. She never faces consequences for her behavior. It's not even about the stupid cake anymore. It's about boundaries and respect. I've been trying for years to have a good relationship with her, to include her in our lives, to not rock the boat. But I'm tired of always being the one to take the high road, while she just keeps doing whatever she wants. Now I feel stuck. I don't want to cause more family drama, but I also don't want to set a precedent that she can treat me however she wants, and I'll just apologize afterward. Adam says maybe we should invite her to dinner soon and talk it out, but I don't know if I can sit across from her right now without feeling angry all over again. So now I'm here, wondering, am I really supposed to apologize? For being upset that my mother-in-law literally stole my birthday cake and replaced it with one that had her own name on it? Because honestly, the more I think about it, the more insane that sounds. Update: so, A lot has happened since that birthday party disaster. I didn't plan on saying anything more about it, but after everything that's gone down in the last couple of weeks, I feel like I need to vent and maybe get some perspective. After the party, things were awkward between me and Adam. He wasn't mad at me, but I could tell he was torn. His mom kept calling him, acting like she was the one who had been humiliated. She told him that she couldn't believe I'd made such a scene over dessert, and that I needed to grow up. I tried to move on, but it was eating at me every time I opened the fridge and saw the empty cake box still sitting on the shelf. I hadn't thrown it out yet. I got this mix of frustration and disbelief, like, how did this even become a thing? A few days later, Adam told me Linda wanted to clear the air and invited us over for dinner. I didn't really want to go, but he said it might be good to talk face to face and end the tension. I agreed reluctantly when we got there. She greeted Adam with a big hug, then gave me this forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. The first half hour was small talk, her garden, her new hairstylist, something about a neighbor's dog. I could tell she was avoiding the topic. Then she brought out dessert. And I kid you not, she had another cake, a big one from the same bakery I'd ordered from for my birthday. She smiled and said, "See, I got you another one to make up for the misunderstanding." For a second, I actually thought maybe this was her way of apologizing, but then she said, "I made sure to get it bigger this time so there's plenty for everyone. Maybe now we can all move past the drama." The way she said it, like I was the one who caused the drama, made my stomach twist. I asked her if this was her way of saying sorry, and she laughed. "Oh, honey, I didn't do anything that needs an apology. You overreacted. I just thought this might help you feel better." Adam tried to jump in and say something like, "Mom, that's not really the point." But she waved him off. She turned to me and said, "You're welcome, by the way. Not everyone would go to this trouble after being yelled at." I didn't yell at her the first time. I barely even raised my voice. At that point, I realized this wasn't about the cake at all. It was about control. She didn't care about making peace. She just wanted to reframe everything so she could feel like the bigger person while still making me look unreasonable. So, I did something I don't usually do. I stood up for myself right there. I told her as calmly as I could, "Linda, I appreciate that you bought another cake, but this isn't about dessert. You took something that was meant for me, used it without asking, and made it about yourself. You didn't apologize. You're trying to pretend like I made a fuss for no reason. That's not fair." Her face went red. She immediately looked at Adam and said, "See? She's still attacking me." Adam sighed and said, "Mom, she's not attacking you. She's telling you how she feels." Linda crossed her arms, looked straight at me and said, "You're just too sensitive. You've always been that way. I'm trying to keep this family together, and you're acting like I stole your wedding ring, not a slice of cake," I told her. "It's not about the cake, it's about respect, and I'm done pretending it's okay when you cross lines." We left not long after that. The car ride home was quiet for a while, then Adam said, "I'm proud of you for standing your ground." That meant a lot because, to be honest, I was scared he'd be mad, but he wasn't. He said he finally saw how his mom talks to me, and how she always manages to twist things so she's the victim. A few days later, he called her and told her we needed some space. He said he loved her, but her behavior wasn't healthy and that she owed me an apology if she wanted to visit again. She hung up on him. Since then, it's been radio silence. No texts, no calls, nothing, apparently. She's been telling the rest of the family that I'm keeping her son away and trying to control him. A few relatives have even reached out, saying I should just apologize to smooth things over, but honestly, I'm done smoothing things over. I've spent years biting my tongue and trying to keep the peace with her, laughing off the little digs, letting her take over every holiday, acting like her comments didn't sting, but this time, she crossed a line and expected me to roll over again. No, not this time. Adam's been really supportive, which makes me feel hopeful. He even said he's starting to see why I used to get so anxious before family events. We've talked about maybe doing something different for Thanksgiving this year. Just the two of us. Maybe a trip somewhere instead of the usual chaos. I don't know if Linda will ever apologize. I doubt it. People like her rarely admit when they're wrong. But for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I have to chase her approval, and weirdly enough, that feels like a better birthday gift than any cake ever could. Final update. It's been almost 3 months since the birthday cake fiasco, and I honestly didn't think I'd ever write another update, but a lot has changed. Some of it good, some of it just clarifying. After Adam told his mom we needed space, things went cold for a while. I thought maybe time apart would help everyone cool off. But instead of reflecting, Linda doubled down. She started calling other relatives, Adam's aunt, his cousins, even his dad's co-workers, spinning this story about how I'd humiliated her in front of everyone and turned her own son against her. At first, it was just whispers. Then it got ridiculous. Adam's aunt, Cheryl, called him and said she'd heard that I threw the cake at Linda. Threw it, like we were in some dramatic reality show. Adam was furious. He shut it down immediately and told Cheryl exactly what happened. She believed him, thankfully. But it showed us how far Linda was willing to go to paint herself as the victim. Meanwhile, she still hadn't reached out to me directly. Not a text, not a call, nothing. But she did send Adam a long, guilt-trippy message about how she missed her son and hoped he would come home for Sunday dinners again once he was done being manipulated. He didn't respond. Then came Thanksgiving. Normally we go to her house every year, but this time we decided to host a small Friendsgiving at our place. Just a few close friends, my sister and Adam's dad, who, by the way, quietly told us he wasn't taking sides but was tired of Linda's behavior. It was peaceful. No drama, no tension. Just good food and laughter, but apparently, that peace didn't sit well with Linda around 7 p.m. Right when we were sitting down for dessert, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, holding another cake. This one had "Family Forgives" written across the top in fancy lettering. I wish I were joking. She walked in like she owned the place, smiling and saying, "I decided I couldn't let another holiday pass without making amends." Except she didn't mean her making amends. She meant me. Adam asked her to step outside so we could talk privately. She immediately started crying, saying, "I'm just trying to fix things, but she keeps turning you against me." I calmly told her that showing up uninvited wasn't the way to fix things, and that the issue wasn't about forgiveness, it was about respect. She sighed dramatically and said, "You'll understand when you're a mother. Sometimes you just have to take charge when your kids marry someone who doesn't know better." That was it for Adam. I think something in him just snapped. He said, "Mom, enough. You're not the victim here. You've disrespected my wife over and over, and you keep pretending it's all her fault. You've been pushing people away your whole life, and I'm done letting you do it to us." She went silent. Then she turned to me and said, "Congratulations. You finally turned him against his own mother." And she walked out. Left the cake on our front porch. We didn't go after her. We didn't even bring the cake inside. Adam took it straight to the trash. It was hard for him, though. I could see how much it hurt to finally stand up to her like that. He spent his entire life being her peacekeeper, the one who smooths things over whenever she causes conflict. So, after she left, we just sat together on the couch for a long time. I told him I was proud of him. A few weeks later, Linda sent a card addressed only to Adam. Inside was a photo of him as a kid, taped to a handwritten note that said, "You'll always be my baby boy. I hope someday you come to your senses." No apology. No acknowledgement, just more manipulation wrapped in guilt. Adam hasn't replied, and I think that's for the best. He's been seeing a therapist now. Something he actually decided to do on his own. To unpack all the guilt and emotional control his mom has had over him for years. I've started therapy too, mostly to deal with the anxiety that's built up from constantly trying to please people like her. We've learned a lot through this. Mostly that boundaries aren't mean. They're necessary. That family doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. And that sometimes peace comes at the cost of distance. And that's okay. We've also been focusing on us. We took that trip we talked about. A quiet cabin in Colorado over Christmas. Just the two of us. No phones, no drama. No surprise cakes. We cooked together, watched the snow fall. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease a few nights ago. I baked my own birthday-style cake. The same flavor. From the same bakery. Just because I wanted to, Adam helped me decorate it badly, with lopsided frosting and uneven sprinkles. We laughed about how messy it looked, but it was ours. I think that's the best part of all this. The cake story used to make me angry, now it just reminds me of how far we've come. So no, I never got an apology from Linda. And I probably never will, but I don't need it anymore. Because I finally learned that peace doesn't come from other people making things right. It comes from knowing you did. And as for whether I should have apologized, no, not for standing up for myself, not for demanding respect. And definitely not for the cake. Stories number 2. My sister said she was pregnant, and I didn't believe her. Now I can't sleep at night. When my sister told us she was pregnant, I laughed. Not in a cruel way, more like a nervous, disbelieving chuckle that slipped out before I could stop it. I genuinely didn't think she was serious. For context, my sister Lydia has always been the family's wild card. She's 30, 2 years older than me, and her life has been a rotating door of impulsive decisions and chaotic relationships. I love her, but I also learned early on not to take everything she says at face value. The pregnancy announcement came during one of our mom's Sunday dinners back in February. Lydia walked in late, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a venti Starbucks like it was her emotional support animal. She sat down, sighed dramatically, and said, "So I'm pregnant." My mom gasped. My dad blinked in silence, and I, being the cynical younger brother, just said, "Sure, Lydia." She glared at me like I'd slapped her. Why would I lie about that? That's the thing. Lydia had said a lot of things before. That she was moving to LA to be a model. That she was engaged. She wasn't. That she'd been accepted into a grad program. She hadn't even applied. So yeah, I didn't believe her. The room turned tense. My mom scolded me, told me to be supportive. Lydia stood up, muttered something about me being emotionally constipated, and left. I figured she was bluffing, looking for attention again. For weeks, I didn't reach out. I told myself I was done being manipulated by her constant drama. Then came the ultrasound photo. She texted it to the family group chat with no caption, just her name, date, and a tiny, bean-shaped blur in grayscale. My stomach dropped. I felt a weird mix of shock and shame. Like I'd just been caught saying something cruel about someone who overheard me. Mom responded right away with hearts and crying emojis. Dad sent a thumbs up. I didn't say anything for 2 days. When I finally texted, I wrote, "Congrats. Didn't know it was real?" My bad, Lydia didn't reply. I told myself it was fine. She was probably hormonal, or busy, or whatever pregnant people were. But weeks turned into months, and she barely spoke to me. Mom told me Lydia was struggling. Morning sickness, anxiety, fighting with the baby's father, a guy named Ryan I'd never met. I wanted to care, I really did. But something in me had hardened over the years. I'd been the one to bail her out of parking tickets, pick her up when she got stranded, pay her back rent once when she swore she'd totally pay me back, so I didn't reach out. Not once. The baby shower came around in August. I wasn't planning to go, but Mom begged me. She said Lydia wanted me there to make peace. I finally gave in. When I walked into the community center, I almost didn't recognize my sister. Her hair was tied back, her makeup minimal, her belly round and obvious. She looked different, grounded, glowing even. "Hey," I said awkwardly. She just smiled faintly. Hey, it wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. She handed me a cupcake and went back to chatting with friends. Later, while she was opening gifts, I overheard her telling someone that she'd been terrified I'd never come. That hit me harder than I expected. I ended up helping clean up after the party, folding tissue paper and stacking gift bags. When everyone else left, it was just the two of us sweeping the floor. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She didn't look at me at first. "You didn't believe me? That hurt, I know," I said. "I just thought you were doing one of your things again?" "Well," she said, shrugging. "This is one thing I couldn't fake," she smiled. And for a moment, it felt like we were kids again. But the peace didn't last. 2 weeks later, Lydia went into early labor. I was at work when Mom called, crying so hard she could barely get the words out. There were complications. The baby, a boy, was stillborn. I drove straight to the hospital. When I walked into her room, Lydia was lying there pale and empty-eyed, clutching a tiny blue blanket. She looked up at me and whispered, "He didn't make it." I froze. My throat closed. All I could think was that I hadn't been there. I hadn't believed her. I hadn't texted, called, or done anything that might have mattered. I sat beside her, reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. We just sat there, crying in silence. A week later, we buried the baby. His name was Eli. Lydia asked me to carry one of the white roses during the service. I did, and afterward, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. It's been 3 months now. Lydia's in therapy. She's back to living with Mom for a while. Sometimes she sends me pictures of the little nursery she couldn't bring herself to take down. I always text back something small. Heart emoji, thinking of you, whatever feels safe, but at night, I can't stop replaying that first dinner, the way I left. The way she looked at me like she couldn't believe her own brother didn't trust her. I tell myself people change, that I couldn't have known, but deep down, I did. I just didn't give her the benefit of the doubt. Now, whenever my phone buzzes, I hope it's her. Not because I know what to say, but because I still want the chance to say it. Update. It's been half a year since I posted, and reading back what I wrote feels like opening a wound that never really healed right. I didn't expect that story to get any attention, but I ended up reading through every comment. Hundreds of strangers telling me I wasn't a monster, that guilt was a sign of love, that maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild things with Lydia. At the time, I didn't know if I even deserved that kind of forgiveness. But now, things have changed, slowly, painfully, but they have. Lydia moved back into her own place 2 months ago, a small apartment near the lake, close enough that Mom can drop by, but far enough that she can breathe again. I helped her move in. The first time I stepped into that space, I noticed a tiny shelf by the window, pictures, candles, and a framed print of baby footprints with Eli James written underneath. I didn't ask questions, I just carried boxes, built her new bed frame, and tried not to cry when I saw the soft blue blanket folded neatly in a drawer. She caught me looking at it and said, "I can't throw it away," I said. "You shouldn't have to." That was one of the first real conversations we'd had since the funeral. I visit her every Sunday now. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we just sit on the couch, watching those baking shows she loves. There's always a candle burning, lavender or vanilla, and soft music playing. The first few weeks were heavy. She'd tear up out of nowhere, and I'd feel this helpless ache in my chest because there's no fixing something like that. All I could do was listen. I think the hardest part for me has been realizing how much of our relationship I took for granted. I was always so convinced Lydia was the one who needed to grow up. But looking back, I was just as immature, just in a different way. I built this wall of skepticism and pride around myself and called it boundaries. But what it really was fear. Fear of being disappointed again, of caring too much. A couple months ago, Lydia asked if I'd go to a support group with her. "It's for parents who lost infants," she said. "You don't have to talk. I just don't want to go alone." I went. It was held in a community center basement with bad coffee and folding chairs. There were maybe a dozen people there. Moms, dads, grandparents. When Lydia introduced me as her brother, there was this quiet understanding in the room. Nobody judged me for being the skeptic brother who didn't believe her. They just nodded. One woman, maybe in her 50s, said, "Sometimes people don't show up until they know it's real, but showing up now still matters." I didn't know how badly I needed to hear that until then. Lydia's doing better. She's working part-time at a local bookstore, and she started volunteering at the hospital that helped her through her delivery. She told me she wants to train as a grief counselor eventually. "I don't want what happened to be just pain," she said. "I want it to mean something. And me? I'm trying to be the brother I should have been." I go to therapy now too. My therapist, Dr. Nolan, helped me understand that disbelief isn't always cruelty. It can come from exhaustion, or fear, or the erosion of trust over time. But guilt can either bury you or push you to become better. Mom's still protective of Lydia, hovering more than she probably should, but she's slowly easing up. Dad keeps things practical, fixing leaky faucets and mowing her lawn. It's his way of saying "I love you." A few weeks ago, on what would have been Eli's first birthday, Lydia invited us all to the lake. It wasn't a sad gathering, surprisingly. She brought cupcakes with blue frosting, and we released small paper lanterns over the water at dusk. I stood beside her as the lanterns drifted away, and she whispered, "He mattered, even if he never took a breath," I told her. "He still changed everything." And he did. That night, Lydia hugged me and said, "You're my favorite person again." It was the first time I'd heard that since we were kids. I don't think I'll ever stop feeling guilty for that first laugh, for that moment of disbelief that broke her heart. But maybe guilt isn't the enemy. It's the reminder, the part of me that won't let me take love for granted again. Now, when Lydia calls, I always answer. If she texts, I text back right away. It doesn't matter if she's crying or bored, or just wants to talk about the new Taylor Swift album. I show up because I learned something through all this. People can mess up, even deeply, but what defines you isn't the mistake. It's what you do after. Lydia's stronger now, I think I am too, and sometimes, when we're sitting together, she'll place her hand on my arm and say, "Thanks for being here." And every single time I say "always," final update. It's been a little over a year since I wrote the first post about Lydia. It feels strange even typing that name out for Reddit again, because now it doesn't feel like something I need to confess anymore. It feels like something I survived. Something we survived. Lydia's life looks completely different now. She finished her certification as a grief support volunteer in June, and the hospital offered her a full-time position shortly after. She spends her days meeting with families who've lost babies. Mothers, fathers, sometimes siblings, and just listens. She says she doesn't have to fix anyone. She just sits with them in their pain, because she knows that sometimes that's all a person can handle, she told me once. It's the only job that makes me feel like Eli didn't leave me empty. I still remember the day she told me she'd taken the job. We were at our favorite coffee shop downtown, the same place we used to go as teenagers. She was stirring her drink absent-mindedly, smiling at the foam pattern, and said, "I think I found something I can build my life around." And I realized right then how much she'd grown. How much we both had, I won't lie. There were still rough moments this year. Lydia had a panic attack on Mother's Day. She called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. I left work without telling my boss and drove straight over. When I got there, she was sitting on the floor of her kitchen, holding that same little blue blanket. Shaking, I sat down next to her, wrapped my arm around her, and said nothing for the longest time. Then she whispered, "I feel like I failed him." And I said, "You didn't. You loved him." "That's what he got from you." She cried harder after that. But it was different, like a release later. She said she didn't remember what I said, just that I didn't leave. That's what I promised myself this year, to never leave. Not emotionally, not when things get uncomfortable. I started going to a men's support group my therapist recommended. Nothing fancy, just a circle of guys trying to be less emotionally constipated. As Lydia once called me, I told them about her. About how disbelief can fracture a family. About how shame can turn into connection if you let it. One of the guys, Mark, said, "Sounds like you didn't lose your sister. You just had to find her again." He was right. Around late summer, Lydia started dating again. I met the guy, Evan, and, to my surprise, he's actually decent, quiet, respectful, and patient in a way that reminds me of how our dad treats Mom after all these years. The first time I saw them together, Lydia laughed in this effortless way I hadn't heard in ages. It made me realize how long I'd been waiting to hear it a few months ago. She told me she and Evan were planning a small memorial run in Eli's name. Not for money, she said. Just to get people together, to celebrate the babies who didn't get to grow up. I helped her design the flyers, and we spent a week stapling them to bulletin boards around town. The turnout was small, maybe 50 people, but it was beautiful. Everyone wore soft blue ribbons, and Lydia read a short letter she'd written to Eli. I stood at the edge of the park, watching her speak with this calm strength I didn't recognize from the sister I once doubted. Afterward, she walked over, hugged me, and said, "You're part of his story, too." You know, that one sentence broke me in the best way, because for the first time, I didn't feel like the brother who failed her. I felt like the brother who finally showed up. Mom still tears up whenever she sees Lydia laugh. Dad started building her a wooden bench for her backyard. He carved Eli's garden into it. She planted white roses around it last month. As for me, I'm still learning, still trying. I've started volunteering at the same hospital once a week, helping in their family support department. Lydia says she's proud of me, and I think she means it. The guilt doesn't own me anymore. It's still there, like a scar you can trace with your fingers, but it doesn't hurt to touch it now. It just reminds me of what I owe the people I love. Belief, patience, presence. Sometimes I think about that dinner table a year and a half ago. The moment she said, "I'm pregnant," and I laughed. I wish I could go back and stop myself, but if I did, maybe I wouldn't have learned what it really means to love someone past your own skepticism. Last week, Lydia texted me a photo. It was of a tiny pair of socks she'd knitted. White with little clouds stitched on the cuffs. She captioned it, "Just something for the future." I didn't ask if that meant she was trying again. I didn't need to. I just texted back, "Whatever happens, I'm here, because this time I mean it. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that showing up late is still better than never showing up at all." Stories number 3. My husband booked a cabana without telling me. So, a few weeks ago, my husband and I decided to take a short vacation to this nice resort in Florida. It was one of those trips where you're just desperate to get away and relax. We've both been stressed. He's been working crazy hours and I've been juggling my own job and trying to manage everything at home. We thought a few days by the pool with some drinks would be the reset we needed. When we got there, it was beautiful. The kind of place where everything smells like sunscreen and ocean air, and people walk around in floppy hats holding frozen cocktails. I could literally feel my shoulders drop the moment we checked in. We unpacked, changed into swimsuits, and went straight to the pool area. That's when I noticed the cabanas. They were these fancy, shaded setups with big loungers, curtains, and a little fridge stocked with drinks. Definitely nice, but also definitely expensive. We found some regular loungers by the pool, and I was happy with that. But my husband, Mark, started glancing toward the cabanas like he was tempted. I made a joke like, "Don't even think about it. We're not made of money." He laughed and said something like, Yeah, I know. That was that, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up and saw a text on his phone confirming a cabana reservation for the next 2 days. I asked him about it, and he smiled like it was some romantic surprise. He said, "I thought it would be nice for us to have our own space. You can nap, read, and we'll have shade." I already paid for it. I tried to act appreciative, but honestly I was annoyed. Those things were ridiculously priced, like $450 a day. He booked 2 days, which is basically a whole extra night's stay at the resort. I told him that while it was sweet, I would have liked to be consulted before spending almost $1,000 on something we didn't need. He brushed it off, saying, "It's vacation, just enjoy it." So I tried, I really did. But it started bothering me more once we actually got to the cabana. It wasn't even that special. The drinks in the fridge weren't included. We had to pay separately. And the private waiter was just a pool attendant who checked on us every hour. Meanwhile, every time I saw the resort charge show up on our account, my stomach twisted. I couldn't relax knowing that chunk of money was gone over something we didn't agree on. At one point, while he was napping, I went for a walk and called my sister. I told her the whole story, expecting her to take my side. Instead, she laughed and said, "You're mad because your husband surprised you with something nice on vacation? Girl, relax." But it didn't feel nice. It felt like he just ignored what I'd said. Later that afternoon, Mark could tell I was off. He asked what was wrong, and I told him I appreciated the thought. But it's not just about the cabana. It's about being a team when it comes to money. We don't have separate finances, everything's shared. If I dropped $1,000 on a spa treatment without talking to him, he'd definitely say something. He got defensive and said I was overreacting and killing the mood. That night, dinner was awkward. We barely talked. I could tell he thought I was being ungrateful. I was frustrated that he couldn't see my side. That it wasn't about the gesture. It was about communication. The next day, we used the cabana again because it was already paid for. But the vibe was weird. We mostly sat in silence. He scrolled through his phone while I read my book. It was supposed to be this relaxing luxury experience, but it just made me feel disconnected from him. When we got home, I brought it up again. I said I needed him to understand why I was upset, not to argue, but to make sure we're on the same page going forward. He sighed and said, "Fine, next time I'll run every decision by you, even if it's something nice." His tone was sarcastic, which just made me feel worse. I told him I wasn't trying to make him feel bad for doing something kind. I just wish he'd talk to me first. "We're saving for a down payment on a house, and $1,000 isn't nothing," he said. "Okay, I get it." But it didn't sound like he really did. It's been a couple of weeks, and he's still a bit distant. I keep wondering if I overreacted. I mean, it was a nice gesture, but I also feel like he completely disregarded me after I made my feelings about those cabanas clear. I'm not a controlling person. I just think decisions like that should be shared. My mom sided with me when I told her, saying that's a lot of money for something that wasn't discussed. But my sister and a few friends think I should have just appreciated it and let it go. I can't tell if I was justified in being annoyed, or if I let my anxiety about money overshadow the intention behind what he did. Maybe it's both. Maybe I just wanted him to listen, not to be the guy who surprises me with something I'd already said no to. Update: it's been a few months since the cabana argument, and I honestly didn't expect it to stick around in my head as long as it did. But it became one of those quiet issues that just lingers, resurfacing in small ways every time we talked about money or planned something. It somehow circled back to that moment. After we got home, Mark and I went through a stretch where we were polite but not close. You know that in-between stage where things aren't technically bad, but you can feel the distance? That's where we lived for a while. We weren't fighting every day, but the tone between us was different, short, careful, like we were both trying not to say the wrong thing. One night in early September, we were sitting on the couch watching TV when an ad for a cruise came on. Mark looked over at me and said, "Would you even want to do something like that? Or would it be too expensive?" It wasn't a mean comment, but the way he said it was laced with frustration. I could tell the cabana thing was still on his mind. I paused the show and said, "Can we actually talk about this without being sarcastic for once?" He looked surprised but nodded. That conversation ended up lasting hours. He admitted that he felt like I embarrassed him by complaining about something he thought was romantic. He said he grew up watching his dad surprise his mom with things like trips or big dinners, and he always thought that's what being a good husband looked like. Doing something nice without having to ask permission first. I told him I appreciated that. But that's not how I see partnership. I grew up in a family where my parents fought constantly about money because my dad made big decisions on his own. I said, to me, it's not about needing permission. It's about being a team. I want us to be able to talk before we spend big, no matter who's paying. He got quiet for a while, then said he hadn't realized how deep that ran for me. He apologized, genuinely this time. And I admitted that I probably could have handled it better too. Maybe not shut down the gesture in the moment. I could have just enjoyed the cabana and brought it up later, instead of letting my annoyance ruin both our days. After that, things started to thaw. A few weekends later, we decided to do a little redo of the vacation. Not at a resort, but just a Saturday by the lake near our town. We brought snacks, books, and a cooler. No fancy setup. Just us at one point. He pulled out this little pop-up shade tent he'd ordered online, and with a grin said, "Your very own budget-friendly cabana." I laughed so hard I almost dropped my drink. It was goofy and sweet and exactly what I needed. We've since made a rule that any purchase over $300 gets talked about first. Not because we don't trust each other, but because it's easy to let small splurges add up. And I noticed something funny. He actually seems relieved about it. I think he used to feel pressure to be the fun one, the guy who makes the big romantic gestures. Now he just asks, and we decide together. It's not like everything's magically perfect, though. Last month, he brought up booking a couple's massage for our anniversary. He started the conversation by saying, "I wanted to surprise you, but I figured I should check first." It made me laugh, and also feel a little bad, because I realized how careful he's being now. I don't want him to feel like he has to walk on eggshells around me either. We talked about that too. And I told him I do like surprises, just not expensive ones that affect our savings. If he wants to bring home flowers or cook dinner or plan a spontaneous picnic, I'm all for it. I just don't want financial surprises. The cabana ended up being less about the money and more about how we handle each other's intentions. He thought he was being thoughtful. I thought he was being dismissive. Both things were true in their own way. Looking back, I think we both learned something important from it. He learned that surprises aren't always romantic if they ignore a boundary. And I learned that sometimes the person trying to make you happy might not realize they've crossed a line until you tell them why it matters. It's strange how a fight about a pool cabana turned into one of the most honest conversations we've had in years. We still joke about it sometimes. If he ever hints at another vacation, I'll say, as long as it doesn't come with curtains and a mini fridge, he'll roll his eyes, grin and reply, "Deal? Final update? It's been almost a year since the cabana argument. And if you told me back then that something so small would end up changing how we communicate, I wouldn't have believed it, but it really did. It wasn't about a pool, or money, or even the cabana. It was about how we handle each other when we don't see eye to eye, and how easy it is to miss the point when we're both trying to feel understood." After that talk in September, things slowly started to get better. We didn't have some big dramatic breakthrough moment. It was more like small shifts over time. He started looping me in on decisions without sounding defensive, and I stopped assuming every surprise was going to end with a credit card charge. I could tell we were both trying. The real test came around the holidays. His company gave him a huge year-end bonus, and he wanted to use part of it for something fun. I told him that sounded great, thinking he'd suggest new furniture or maybe a weekend trip. Instead, he said, "What if I book us another resort stay? My treat this time. And I promise, no secret cabanas." I laughed. But I also felt that tiny twist in my chest again. The last resort trip had left such a weird taste in my memory. But he'd learned from it, and I didn't want to let my old resentment ruin something new. So I said yes, with one condition: we'd plan it together. We ended up going to Arizona in February, to a smaller, quieter resort. The kind that doesn't have a pool with DJs or fancy cabanas. Just a few lounge chairs and desert views. The first morning we were there, he ordered breakfast to our patio and set up 2 chairs facing the sunrise. He handed me coffee and said, "See? No shade tents or hidden fees." It was perfect, simple, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of gesture that actually means something to me. That trip felt like a reset. We talked about everything, not just money, but how we'd been drifting before all this. I realized the cabana wasn't just about him spending without asking. It represented how I'd started feeling invisible in our marriage. He thought he was giving me something I wanted, but he hadn't actually been listening to me for a while. And I wasn't always communicating clearly either. I'd been holding in frustration about work, our finances, even just feeling tired all the time. When the cabana thing happened, it all came out at once. It's funny, because now when I think about it, that argument was kind of the wake-up call we needed. Since then, we've been more deliberate about checking in. Not in a forced or overly serious way, but just being aware of each other. If something's bothering one of us, we actually talk about it before it turns into resentment. Earlier this summer, we went to a friend's wedding in California. The hotel had pool cabanas again. When we checked in, the concierge offered us an upgrade, and we both burst out laughing before she even finished her sentence. I explained very briefly that we had history with cabanas. The woman smiled and said, "I'll make sure you get a nice umbrella instead." That moment kind of summed everything up for me. We'd gone from being tense and distant to being able to laugh about it together. There's something grounding about realizing your marriage doesn't have to be picture perfect to be solid. We still argue sometimes. We still get on each other's nerves, but now there's a level of honesty that didn't exist before. I don't worry as much about whether he'll take my feelings seriously. And he doesn't worry about being wrong for trying. A few nights ago, we were sitting outside, talking about where we might want to buy a house next year. He said, "Remember when I thought spending $1,000 on a cabana was a good idea?" I smiled and said, "You were trying to make me happy. You just picked the wrong kind of shade." He laughed, reached for my hand, and said, "I think we're better at this now." And he's right. We are. If you'd told me that one petty vacation argument would make our marriage stronger, I probably would have rolled my eyes. But that's exactly what happened. We learned how to listen. We learned how to be on the same side even when we disagree, and no, we still haven't rented another cabana, but we did buy 2 beach chairs, matching ones. And every time we set them up, he jokes, "Our affordable, communication-approved cabanas." I think that's what real growth looks like. Not dramatic apologies or grand gestures, just 2 people sitting in their folding chairs, learning to enjoy the same view. Stories number 4. I wanted to split living costs with my boyfriend instead of paying him rent. When I, 27F, moved in with my boyfriend, Mark, 30M, I thought it would be a natural next step in our relationship. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and it just made sense. We spent most nights together anyway, and when my lease was ending, he brought it up first. He said, "Why keep paying some random landlord when you could just move in here?" It sounded great at the time. His apartment was nice, a 2-bedroom place downtown, close to my job, with a small balcony and great light. He bought it a few years ago, right before the housing market went wild, so he got a decent deal. I knew he was proud of owning a home in his early 30s, and honestly, I admired that. When we first talked about me moving in, I asked him, "How do you want to handle expenses?" He said we'd figure it out later, but I assumed it meant splitting groceries, utilities and such, normal couple stuff. I offered to pay my share of the bills, and even cover more groceries since I do most of the cooking. But when the move-in date got closer, Mark sat me down and said, "Okay, so about rent, what do you think is fair?" I said, "Rent? I thought we were splitting costs." He said, "Yeah, but this is my property. If you lived anywhere else, you'd be paying rent, right? So I think it's fair you contribute like a tenant would." That threw me off a bit. I asked, "Do you mean splitting mortgage payments?" And he said no, not the mortgage, because that's his investment. He wanted me to pay him a flat rate. Essentially, market rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in our area, which was about $1,400 a month. That's actually more than I paid at my old place. I told him that didn't feel right. We're supposed to be partners, not landlord and tenant. I said I'd happily split expenses, 50-50. Utilities, groceries, insurance, maintenance, anything like that. But paying him rent on top of that made it feel transactional. He said, "Well, it's not fair that I shoulder all the housing costs while you live here for free." I pointed out that living together should benefit both of us. I'd be helping with the household, cooking, cleaning, contributing to bills, and sharing responsibilities. Plus, he'd still be building equity in his property, while I'd just be throwing money away into his mortgage. He got defensive and said, "It's not about profit, it's about fairness." But if it wasn't about profit, then why was he charging me market rate? We went back and forth for a while. I even suggested a compromise. I could pay a smaller housing contribution, maybe half the mortgage amount instead of full rent, since we'd both be benefiting. That way, it would still be fair but not so one-sided. He didn't like that either, he said. You wouldn't argue about paying rent to a landlord, so why argue about paying me? I said, because I'm not dating my landlord. That did not go over well. He got quiet after that and said, you know, I thought you'd appreciate living somewhere nice without dealing with random roommates or a lease. I told him I did appreciate it, but I wasn't comfortable being treated like a tenant in my boyfriend's home. I wanted to build something together, not feel like a guest paying to stay in his investment property. We didn't talk for a day after that conversation. I started wondering if maybe I was overreacting. I mean, it is his home, and he does have to pay the mortgage every month. But something about it just didn't sit right with me. When I told my best friend, Rachel, she said, he's basically turning your relationship into a business deal. That's weird. My brother, on the other hand, thought it was fair, he said. If you were living anywhere else, you'd pay rent anyway, at least this way. The money stays in the relationship. Except it doesn't. It stays in his name. I started thinking about how this might play out long term. What happens if we break up? Would I just pack up and go, losing everything I paid toward his mortgage? What if I help fix the place up or pay for repairs? Does that count for anything? I even asked him that directly, and he said, well, if we ever get married, then it all balances out. That made me pause. If we ever get married, not exactly reassuring. We've been mostly okay since then, but the dynamic has changed. I feel tense about money now. Every time I transfer him money for groceries or utilities, I wonder if he's silently thinking about how I'm living rent-free a few nights ago. He brought it up again and asked if I'd made a decision. I told him honestly that I'm not sure I can live with someone who sees me as a tenant. I said I'd rather pay my share of actual expenses and contribute in other ways than pay him rent like a landlord. He said, then maybe moving in isn't a good idea after all. That hurt, because it made me realize that for him, this wasn't about building a life together. It was about making sure things stayed his. He wanted control. He wanted the security of knowing I was contributing to his investment, but not enough to share ownership or equity. So now I'm sitting here in my half-packed apartment, wondering if I should just renew my lease. I love him, he's kind, funny, and we get along so well otherwise. But this whole situation has made me see another side of him. One that's a little too comfortable mixing love with business. Part of me worries that if I move in and agree to pay rent, I'll always feel like I'm living in his place, not our home. And if I don't, maybe I'll lose someone I really care about. I honestly don't know what's worse, being single again or being in a relationship where my boyfriend treats me like a tenant. Update. So it's been a few weeks since I first posted, and I didn't expect this situation to get as emotionally complicated as it did. I honestly thought it would be a simple disagreement about money, but it's turned into something that's really made me look at who Mark and I are as people, and what kind of relationship we actually have. After our last talk, I told Mark I was leaning toward not moving in. He didn't say much at first, just nodded and said, I get it. For a few days, things were kind of tense but civil. We still saw each other, went on dates, and tried to act normal, but it felt like there was this invisible wall between us. Then one night he called me and said, can you come over? I think we should talk about the apartment again. I went, thinking maybe he'd changed his mind. When I got there, he had spreadsheets printed out, actual spreadsheets, showing the cost of his mortgage, HOA fees, property taxes, utilities, and estimated maintenance. He explained how much he paid per month and said, see, it's not just about money. I need to know we're both contributing fairly if you live here. I told him again that I didn't want to be a tenant. I wanted to be a partner. I said if we were splitting living expenses, I'd pay half the utilities, groceries, and even chip in for house maintenance. But paying him rent, at market rate, made it feel like I was investing in something that only benefited him. He sighed and said, but you're using half the space. Why shouldn't you pay for it? That was when I asked, okay, then what happens if we break up? Do I get anything back? Do I have any rights? Or do I just leave with nothing after paying you thousands? He hesitated for a second, then said, well, it's my property. You'd have to move out, obviously. That word stuck with me all night because it wasn't obvious to me. It was painful. It made me realize that Mark didn't see me as an equal partner in this next step. He saw me as an addition to his already established life, someone who could fit into his structure without changing it. I wasn't building a home with him. I was just occupying space in one he already owned. I left that night feeling defeated. When I told my friend Rachel what happened, she said, that's not a relationship, it's a lease agreement. My mom, who's usually more traditional, surprised me by agreeing. She said, if he wanted to build a life with you, he'd want to build it together, not rent it out to you. But the thing is, Mark isn't a bad guy. He's responsible, organized, and logical, sometimes too logical. He genuinely believes that splitting costs down to the cent is fair. But what he doesn't seem to understand is that relationships aren't purely transactional. Fair doesn't always mean equal in dollars. Sometimes it means emotional balance, shared effort, or long-term investment in each other. A few days later, I asked him if he'd ever considered putting my name on any future property. Even partially, not his current condo, just hypothetically. If we bought something together someday, he looked surprised and said, "Why would I do that if you're not contributing to the down payment?" And that's when it clicked for me. He doesn't see our relationship as a we situation. He sees it as two individuals managing separate accounts that occasionally overlap. That might work for some couples, but not for me. Still, I didn't want to make a rash decision. We took a week apart. No calls, no texts. I needed space to think. During that week, I realized something kind of sobering. I'd been romanticizing our relationship for a long time. I saw us as partners building toward a future, but he saw me as someone joining his life plan, under his terms. It's not that he doesn't love me, he does, but he loves me in a way that fits neatly into his structure, and I don't fit neatly into anyone's spreadsheet. When we finally met up again, I told him I wasn't going to move in. He seemed disappointed but not angry. He said, "I just wish you'd look at it logically." I told him I had. And logically, paying rent to my boyfriend who's already building equity just doesn't make sense. He asked if this meant we were breaking up. I said I didn't know, because part of me still loved him deeply. But another part was starting to realize love isn't enough when two people see fairness so differently. He said, "I'm not trying to take advantage of you," and I said, "I know, but that doesn't mean this feels right." We ended that night on a bittersweet note. We hugged, said we'd talk again soon, and left it at that. A week later, he texted me saying he'd been thinking about it and realized he might have been too rigid. He said, "Maybe I was thinking more like a homeowner than a partner." He offered to do a 50-50 split of shared expenses only. No rent. It was a good gesture. But by then, something in me had shifted. I didn't want to move in anymore. The trust had taken a hit, not because he tried to scam me or anything, but because the way he handled it showed me how differently we view relationships. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I was going to renew my own lease. I said maybe we could revisit it in the future, but right now, I needed to feel independent. He said he understood, and honestly, since that talk, things have actually been calmer between us. We still see each other, but there's less tension. Maybe because I'm no longer trying to fit into something that didn't feel quite right. I don't know what'll happen long term. Maybe we'll work through it. Maybe we'll drift apart, but I do know this. I'm not going to apologize for wanting a partnership that feels like a home, not a financial arrangement. Because if you have to sign a metaphorical lease to be in love, maybe it's not the right place to live. Final update. It's been about 6 months since I wrote that last update, and I can finally say I've made peace with everything that happened. It took a while, but the situation with Mark taught me more about myself, relationships, and self-worth than any book or advice column ever could. When I decided not to move in, I honestly thought it might be the beginning of the end for us. We stayed together for a bit after that, still dating, still trying, but the energy had changed. Something between us had cracked, quietly but deeply. At first, Mark seemed okay with it. He even came over to my apartment a few times, helped me fix a few things, cooked dinner and acted normal. But every now and then, he'd make these little comments that told me he hadn't really let it go. Things like, "You're still paying more in rent than you would have living with me," or "You could be saving money if we were sharing expenses." I'd just smile and change the subject. But every time he said it, it reminded me why I'd made the choice I did. Because the issue was never about saving money. It was about principle, about partnership, about feeling like equals. A month later, he brought it up again, but this time it came out in an argument. We were out to dinner with some of his friends, and one of them, joking around, asked when I was finally going to move into the bachelor pad. Mark laughed and said, "When she's ready to pay her share of the mortgage." The whole table laughed, but I didn't. It felt like I'd been turned into a punchline. After we left the restaurant, I told him that wasn't funny. He said, "It was a joke," but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a glimpse of how he really saw things. That night, we had our biggest fight ever. I told him I was tired of feeling like he saw our relationship through a calculator, that he made me feel more like a roommate than a partner. He said, "I'm just practical. Not everything has to be romantic," I said. But love isn't supposed to feel like a business meeting. We both went quiet after that. I think we both knew it was over in that moment, even though we didn't say it out loud. We tried to patch things up for a few more weeks. Date nights, little texts, pretending like we were okay. But the warmth wasn't there anymore. The next time we saw each other, I told him I thought we should take a break. He nodded and said he understood. No dramatic fight, no yelling. Just two people realizing they weren't aligned anymore. We haven't spoken much since. He texted me once on my birthday to wish me well. I thanked him, and that was that. It hurt, I won't lie. For a while, I kept wondering if I'd made a mistake. If maybe I should have just agreed to pay the rent and seen it as a compromise. But then I remembered how it made me feel, like my love and effort didn't count unless I was putting a dollar amount on it. And I realized that if I'd agreed to his terms, I'd probably still be living in his apartment, second-guessing every expense, walking on eggshells over fairness. That's not how I want to live, or love. Since then, my life has changed in ways I didn't expect. I renewed my lease, decorated my apartment exactly how I wanted, and even adopted a rescue dog, a sweet golden mix named Bailey. My place finally feels like mine, not temporary career-wise. I got a small promotion, which came with a raise. I used part of it to start saving for a down payment. Not because I'm desperate to own property, but because I want something that's mine, built on my terms. I've also started hanging out with friends more. Rachel's been my rock through all this. And I've realized how much of myself I'd started to lose when I was trying to fit into Mark's world a few weeks ago. I ran into him at a farmer's market. He looked good, a little tired maybe, but friendly. We talked for a few minutes, small talk mostly. He said he'd been renting out his condo to a tenant now, and he was thinking of buying a house next year. I congratulated him and meant it. Then he said, I still think we just had bad timing. I smiled and said, maybe, or maybe we just wanted different things. He nodded and said, you were always more about the emotional stuff. I was about the numbers. I laughed a little and said, yeah, and that's okay because it is. We just weren't built the same way. When I walked away from that conversation, I didn't feel sad. I felt peaceful. I realized that love doesn't have to end in disaster to still teach you something valuable. Mark wasn't a villain. He just had a different view of what partnership means. And while it wasn't what I needed, it helped me understand what I do need. I want someone who sees home as something we build together, not something I rent space in. Someone who measures value not by money, but by shared effort, love and care. So yeah, maybe I didn't move in with my boyfriend. Maybe I walked away from what looked like a smart deal. But in the end, I chose peace over practicality. And that, I think, was the best investment I've ever made. Stories number 5. My boyfriend still texts his ex, good night, and I finally told him I'm not meeting his family until he stops. When I started dating Caleb, I thought I'd finally found someone emotionally stable. I was 27, he was 29, and we met at a trivia night that neither of us wanted to go to. He was the friend of a friend, the kind of guy who laughs with his whole face and orders fries for the table without asking. We hit it off fast. Banter, long talks, weekend trips to the farmer's market. It felt easy in a way I hadn't had in years, but about 3 months in, something started to feel off. He was glued to his phone a lot, not in a secretive way. Exactly. Just that distracted half-presence that makes you feel like you're competing with a screen. I noticed a few times he'd smile at messages, type something back quickly, and then flip his phone face down. One night we were lying in bed, scrolling in silence, and I saw his phone light up with a text. Good night. The name on the screen said Mara. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the screen until he noticed me looking. He froze for a second, then said, oh, that's just Mara, my ex. Your ex? I asked. Why is she texting you goodnight with a heart? He shrugged like it was no big deal. We stayed friends, we do that sometimes. Sometimes? Every night, he admitted, grinning sheepishly. It's kind of a thing. We used to do it when we dated, and it just stuck. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I asked how long they'd been together. He said 3 years. Broke up almost a year before we met. Apparently, they'd agreed to stay in each other's lives, because the breakup was mature and mutual. I didn't know whether to be annoyed or impressed by that level of emotional delusion. For a few weeks, I tried to brush it off. I told myself not to be the jealous girlfriend. Every time I'd see her name pop up on his screen, I'd pretend it didn't sting, but then it became impossible to ignore. He'd tell me goodnight, roll over, and I'd hear his phone buzz right after. sometimes twice if she replied late. One night I said, "Do you realize how weird that is?" He looked confused. "What's weird?" "Telling your ex goodnight every night while you're in bed with your girlfriend." He sighed. "It's just a friendly thing, not romantic. You're reading too much into it." I remember sitting there, staring at him in disbelief. "Would you be fine if I texted my ex every night before bed?" He hesitated for a second too long. "I mean, if you had that kind of friendship, I guess." That was a lie, and we both knew it. I didn't want to fight, so I let it drop, but it kept eating at me. Every time we'd go out, every time he'd get a text, I'd wonder if it was her. I didn't even care what they were saying anymore. The fact that he needed to talk to her that often said enough. Fast forward to last month, Caleb invited me to meet his parents. It was supposed to be this big step. His family lives 2 hours away, and he said his mom really wanted to meet me. I almost said yes right away, but something inside me paused. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, I watched him type something quickly on his phone. I didn't even need to ask who it was. "Good night," he said to me, setting the phone down. "Good night to me," I said. "And to Mara?" He blinked. "Yeah." "I guess that was it for me," I told him. "I'm not meeting your family until you stop texting her." He sat up, defensive instantly. "That's not fair. Mara's part of my life. She's like family to me." "Exactly," I said. "Then introduce her to your parents." He looked stunned, like I'd just punched him. "You're overreacting." I told him I wasn't overreacting. I was setting a boundary, that if he wanted me to be part of his life, I wasn't going to share emotional space with someone he still said goodnight to. He didn't take it well. He said, "You're trying to control me." And I said, "No. I'm trying to see if I matter as much as she does." We didn't speak for 2 days, when he finally called. He said he'd cut back on the texts but wouldn't stop them completely because that would be cruel to her. Cruel to her. Not to me, the person in his bed, in his future plans, the one about to meet his family. I told him I wasn't coming to the dinner. He said his mom was going to be disappointed. I said I'd rather disappoint her than myself. He tried to guilt me, said I was being insecure, said Mara had a new boyfriend anyway, so what was the big deal? I asked if her boyfriend knew about their nightly good nights. He didn't answer. That silence said everything. A week later, we met up at a park to talk. He said he'd been thinking about it, and he didn't want to lose me. But he also didn't think he should have to erase an important person from his life. I told him that no one was asking him to erase her, just to change how he engaged with her, that goodnight texts weren't friendship, they were intimacy, and that he couldn't have both. He said, "If you can't accept that, maybe we're just different kinds of people." I said, "Maybe we are," and that was that. We sat there for a while after, not saying anything. Then he left, and I stayed behind, watching a couple walk their dog by the pond. I remember thinking how relationships sometimes die quietly, not with shouting or betrayal, but with someone choosing someone else's comfort over yours. A few days later, I got a text from him, just one line. "You were right, I didn't ask what he meant. Maybe he'd realized something, maybe not, but I haven't heard from him since. Last week I went to brunch with my friend Sophie, and she said, 'You seem lighter.' And I realized she was right. For months, I'd been shrinking myself to look like the chill girlfriend, when all I really wanted was respect. I don't know if I'll ever stop second-guessing myself in relationships, but I do know this. If someone still needs to text their ex goodnight, they're not ready to say good morning to you." Update. When I wrote that post, I honestly thought I was just venting. I didn't expect people to read it, let alone comment with the kind of passion that they did. Some people called Caleb emotionally cheating. Others said I dodged a bullet, and a few told me maybe he was just naive. I read every comment. I cried at some, laughed at others. But mostly, I started to realize that what I thought was me being dramatic was actually me finally recognizing a pattern I'd been ignoring for years. Caleb and I didn't talk for months after that park conversation. No texts, no calls, nothing. I didn't block him, but I muted his number. It wasn't about waiting for him. It was about not letting him interrupt the silence I was trying to build for myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't tangled up in someone else's emotional mess. It was weirdly peaceful. In March, I ran into him at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go, but Sophie convinced me. "You can't let him make you miss out on good cake," she said. And she was right. The cake was incredible. When I saw him across the table, it felt like seeing a ghost version of someone I used to love. He looked tired, older somehow. Not bad, just weighed down. We exchanged a polite hug. He said, "Hey," I said. "Hey." Later that night, after everyone left, he walked me to my car. He said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. "Just waited," he continued. "You were right about Mara. It wasn't just a friendship." I didn't want to admit that I still needed her validation. That hit harder than I expected. For so long, I thought I was the crazy one for drawing a line. Hearing him admit it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath too long. He told me he'd cut off contact with her a few months ago. Apparently, her new boyfriend had also found the goodnight texts and didn't take it well. Caleb said it made him realize how inappropriate it really was. Then he said, "You deserved better from me." I told him I agreed. It wasn't cruel, it was honest. He asked if I'd ever consider trying again. I didn't hesitate when I said no. I didn't even feel angry anymore, just done. And there's a kind of peace in that too. After that, I started focusing on myself. I picked up running again, joined a weekend ceramics class, and even took a solo trip to Maine just because I'd always wanted to. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting on someone else to decide how I should feel. Around May, I met someone new. Dylan. We met at a friend's cookout, and I remember noticing how present he was. Not the flashy, charming kind of presence Caleb had, but the grounded kind, the "I'm here and I'm listening" kind. We talked for hours that first night about everything from our favorite pizza toppings to how weirdly lonely adulthood can get. We've been together for 4 months now. It's early, but it feels healthy, different. One of the first serious talks we had was about boundaries. I told him about Caleb, about the goodnight texts, and how small that made me feel. Dylan didn't laugh, didn't minimize it. He just said, "Yeah, that would bother me too." Then he added, "Let's both promise to never make each other feel like a side character." It sounds cheesy, but that line stuck with me, because that's exactly what Caleb made me feel like. An extra in a story that already had a leading woman. The funny thing is, when you're in that kind of situation, you don't always realize how off it is. You convince yourself it's fine because you don't want to look insecure. But boundaries aren't insecurity, they're clarity. I've learned that when someone says you're controlling for asking for respect, what they really mean is they're not ready to give it. Caleb reached out one last time in July. He texted, "Hope you're doing well. You deserve someone who knows how to show up." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's the quiet certainty that you'd never go back. I told Sophie about the text later, and she grinned. "That's progress," she said. "The version of you from a year ago would have written a paragraph." She's right. I used to explain myself into exhaustion, trying to convince people to understand me. Now, I just choose peace over explanation. I know Reddit loves a tidy ending, but life's messier than that. Caleb's not a villain, and I'm not a saint. We were two people who wanted different definitions of connection, and mine finally stopped bending. Last weekend, Dylan and I went to the beach for a day trip. We sat on the sand, watching the sunset, and he leaned his head on my shoulder. My phone buzzed. It was late, nearly midnight, and he said, "You can check it if you want." I smiled, left it face down, and said, "It can wait," because for the first time, it could. Final update, it's strange. Reading back what I wrote a year ago, I remember sitting on my couch, typing that original post with shaking hands, feeling stupid and small for even being upset over a few goodnight texts. Now, I see that moment for what it was. The point where I finally stopped settling for half-available love. So, yeah, it's been a year, a full one. Dylan and I are still together. We moved in together 3 months ago, which still feels surreal. His apartment lease was ending, and mine was too. So we decided to get a small place downtown. Nothing fancy, just big windows, a balcony that faces the park, and enough sunlight to make every morning feel a little softer. Living with him has been the calmest thing I've ever experienced. There's no second guessing, no walking on eggshells, no wondering who's getting a good night text. It's simple in the best way. We cook dinner together most nights. He's a great cook. I'm great at chopping vegetables and pretending I helped. Sometimes we'll dance around the kitchen when music's playing. Sometimes we just eat in silence. Either way, it's comfortable. And here's something that surprised me. I don't think about Caleb much anymore. Every now and then his name will come up, through mutual friends, or when I stumble on an old photo, but it doesn't sting. I don't feel anger or regret, it's just neutral. That's how you know you've healed. A few months ago, I actually ran into Mara at a coffee shop. I didn't even recognize her at first. She came up to me and said, "You're Caleb's ex, right?" It was awkward for about 10 seconds, and then we both laughed. She looked embarrassed and said, "For what it's worth, I get it now." Apparently, her relationship with Caleb finally ended for good earlier this year. She said he was still too emotionally attached to his past, and I almost laughed at the irony. But I didn't. She seemed genuinely sad. Not mean, just tired. We talked for a few minutes, about work, life, how messy it all can be, and then she said, "I think we both learned something from the same person." She wasn't wrong. After she left, I sat there for a bit, staring at my coffee, realizing that life doesn't always need villains. Sometimes it's just people fumbling around, trying to fill their own empty spaces. Caleb filled his with nostalgia. I used to fill mine with patience. Now I fill mine with peace. Sophie's still my rock. She came over last weekend with 2 bottles of wine and declared we were having a "thank God you dodged that man" anniversary party. We drank on my balcony, watching the city lights, and she said, "I hope you realize you're not the same person who wrote that post." And she's right. I'm not back then. I measured my worth by how easy I could make myself to love. Now, I measure it by how safe I feel being exactly who I am. I also started therapy this year. My therapist, Dr. Ramirez, helped me see how much of my tolerance for almost love came from always trying to earn it. She said, "You're allowed to expect emotional consistency. That's not a demand, it's a standard." That sentence stuck to my ribs. Dylan met my parents last month. My mom texted me afterward saying, "He listens when you talk." I like that, and I realized how rare that had been before. It's wild how quiet red flags can be when you're busy convincing yourself they're normal. I don't think Caleb's a bad person. I think he's just someone who mistakes contact for connection. I used to be the same way, thinking if you stayed in touch, you stayed important. But sometimes letting go is the only way to make space for something real. Last night, Dylan and I were sitting on the balcony, watching a thunderstorm roll in. He reached over, took my hand, and said, "You seem happy." I smiled and said, "I am, and I meant it." It's funny. The girl who once wrote a post about begging a man to stop texting his ex now doesn't even think twice about where her partner's phone is. That's what healing looks like. Not needing proof anymore because you trust what's in front of you. I don't think I'll ever post on Reddit again, at least not like this. But if anyone stumbles across my story and wonders whether setting a boundary makes you too much, please know it doesn't. The right person will never make you feel guilty for wanting respect. Caleb once said that not texting Mara would be cruel. What I've learned since then is that cruelty isn't silence. It's keeping someone halfway close when you know you're never going to let them all the way in. So, yeah, maybe I lost a relationship back then. But I also found something better. I found me. Stories number 6. My son refused a prenup, so I pulled my wedding money. When my son told me he was getting married, I was genuinely happy for him. He's 30 now, and he's been dating his fiancée for a little over 2 years. I've always liked her well enough. She's polite, smart, and seems to make him happy. They met through mutual friends, and from what I could tell, their relationship moved at a normal pace. They started talking about marriage after a year and got engaged last spring. Everything was great until wedding planning began, and I brought up one thing that completely blew up the piece: a prenup. I've been divorced twice, and both times, I came out worse financially. My first husband left me with half our debt and barely paid child support. My second marriage ended after 6 years when he decided he didn't believe in commitment anymore. Both experiences left me a little cynical, but also realistic. I worked my entire life to build financial stability, and I don't want to watch my son lose everything he's earned because of a bad breakup down the line. My son, Ethan, owns a small but growing landscaping business. He started it right out of college, and it's finally turning into something successful. He's put years of sweat and debt into it, and it's one of the few things he's truly proud of. His fiancée, Brooke, works as a teacher. She doesn't make much, which isn't a criticism. She's hardworking, but the difference in income is big. When they started talking about the wedding, Ethan mentioned that he wanted to do something nice. Nothing huge, but something special. I told him I'd be willing to help cover part of the cost. I have a decent savings, and I wanted to give him the same support I gave his sister when she got married. But I said there was one condition. He needed to get a prenup. I didn't phrase it like an ultimatum at first. I said, "Ethan, I'll help with the wedding, but I really think you should get a prenup before you go through with this. It protects both of you." He immediately looked uncomfortable and said, "Mom, that's not really romantic." I laughed and said, "Neither is divorce court." He told me he didn't want to bring it up to Brooke because he knew she'd take it the wrong way. I said that was exactly why he should talk about it. Because if they can't have a tough conversation now, they're not ready for marriage. He didn't like that. A few weeks later, I asked if he'd brought it up yet, and he said yes, and that it went terribly. According to him, Brooke was hurt and offended. She said it felt like he didn't trust her, and that a prenup implied she was planning to divorce him someday. He told me she started crying and asked if the idea came from me. He said he told her yes, and apparently that made it worse. She thinks I don't believe in their relationship. After that, I became the villain. Brooke has barely spoken to me since. Her mom even called me, saying I'd overstepped. I told her as calmly as I could that I wasn't trying to insult her daughter, but that it's smart to protect assets, especially for small business owners. She said something like, "My daughter isn't that kind of woman," and hung up on me. Ethan came over a few days later. Visibly angry, he said, "You embarrassed me, Mom." "Now Brooke's questioning whether you even like her," I told him. "I do like her. I just want to make sure you're safe. If something happens, you won't lose the business you built," he said. "We're not planning to get divorced," I said. "No one plans to, Ethan." But it happens. That's when he got quiet and said, "If you're going to make this a condition for your money, then keep it." It stung, but I said okay. I told him calmly that it's his choice not to have a prenup. Just like it's my choice not to contribute financially, I'm not punishing him. I just don't want to support something I believe is legally reckless. He said I was being controlling and trying to manipulate him. I told him that wasn't true, that I love him and just want him to protect himself. He walked out. That was 3 months ago. We've talked a little since then, but things are tense. His sister thinks I'm right. She and her husband have a prenup, and she said it was the best decision they made. But my ex-husband, Ethan's dad, thinks I overstepped, and that I should just support our son unconditionally. Ethan and Brooke are still planning the wedding. I wasn't sure if I'd even be invited for a while, but I just got a save the date in the mail last week. It felt formal and cold, like they were sending one out of obligation. Part of me wonders if I should just cave and give him the money anyway. No strings attached, but another part of me thinks that would be a mistake. I didn't raise him to ignore red flags just because love feels strong in the moment. I've seen how messy things get when couples don't think practically. I know a prenup isn't romantic. I know it's awkward and uncomfortable, but marriage is a legal contract, and I can't, in good conscience, help pay for a wedding when I know he's leaving himself wide open if it doesn't work out. Still, I miss him. I miss our closeness. I wish he'd see that this isn't about control or money. It's about love, the kind that doesn't fade when things get hard. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have trusted that he'd make the right decision on his own. But I can't shake this pit in my stomach that says one day he's going to regret not protecting himself. And he's going to look back and remember that I tried to warn him. Update. It's been about 6 months since that whole mess with the prenup blew up. And I've had more time than I'd like to think about how it all went down. The wedding is in 2 months now, and I'm finally starting to feel like I can talk about it without wanting to cry or yell. After my son Ethan told me to keep my money, we barely spoke for a while. He'd answer texts, but everything was short and distant. I'd ask about the wedding planning or how the business was doing, and he'd reply with one-word answers. His fiancée, Brooke, stopped reaching out altogether. I used to get little updates or photos from her, and that just stopped overnight. At first, I thought time would smooth things over. It didn't. Things got worse when I saw Brooke's mom at the grocery store one afternoon. I smiled and said hello, and she barely nodded. Then she said, "You really hurt my daughter." I told her that wasn't my intention, that I just wanted to protect my son. She said, "Then maybe you should have trusted him to make his own decisions," and walked off. I stood there for a good minute feeling like I'd been slapped. About a month later, Ethan came over to pick up some mail I'd been holding for him. It was the first time we'd talked in person since our argument. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from stress, not lack of sleep. I made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table like we used to. He told me wedding planning had been a lot, apparently. Brooke's parents were footing most of the bill now, which I'll admit made me uncomfortable. I asked if he was okay with that, and he shrugged, saying, "It's their gift." I'm not going to argue. Then I brought up the prenup. Carefully, I said, "Ethan, I'm not trying to start another fight. I just want to know if you two ever talked about it again." He exhaled, rubbed his forehead, and said, "Yeah, we did, and no, we're not doing it." Brooke was really hurt by the idea. She said it made her feel like I was expecting our marriage to fail before it even began. I nodded and said, "Okay, you're an adult, it's your decision. I just hope you made it with your eyes open." He looked at me for a long time and said, "You don't trust her, do you?" That question hit hard, I told him. "It's not about trust. It's about being smart. You've worked too hard to put everything at risk," he said. "I'm not putting everything at risk. I'm building a life with someone. You see danger, I see commitment." That stung, but I didn't argue. We sat there in silence for a bit. Then he said quietly, "You really hurt her feelings. She thinks you'll never see her as family." I told him that wasn't true, that I'd love nothing more than to have her in the family. But that love doesn't mean ignoring reality. He shook his head, stood up and said, "You just don't get it." Then he left. After that, I decided to stop bringing it up. I figured he needed to live his life and learn his lessons without me trying to steer him. I sent them both a card a few weeks later congratulating them, and included a handwritten note saying how proud I was of him. I didn't mention money, the prenup, or anything else. About a month after that, I got a call from Brooke. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She was crying. She said she didn't want things to be awkward between us, and that she knew I only wanted to protect Ethan. I told her I appreciated that, and that I never meant to hurt her. We talked for nearly an hour. About her job, their plans for the wedding, and even about how hard it's been to navigate all the family tension. Toward the end of the call, she said something that stuck with me. "I know why you said what you said. If I had a son, I might have done the same." That was the first time I felt any real peace about it. A few days later, Ethan texted me and said, "Brooke told me you two talked. Thanks for that." That small line, no emojis, no sarcasm, felt like a bridge being rebuilt. We've been slowly getting back to normal since then. I'm invited to the rehearsal dinner and the wedding. And Brooke even asked me to come with her mom to one of her dress fittings. I went, and honestly, it was lovely. Seeing her light up in that dress made my heart ache in a good way. She looked beautiful, and I thought, okay, maybe this will be okay. I still haven't offered money again. And they haven't asked. Part of me wanted to, especially when I saw how much Brooke's parents were covering. But I decided that would muddy things again. If they asked, I would have helped. But they didn't. I think they both want to prove they can do it without me. The wedding's coming up soon, and I'm actually looking forward to it now. I even found a dress that doesn't make me feel like the difficult mother of the groom. I'm still a little uneasy about the no prenup thing. That part hasn't changed. I'm not naive. Marriages can go wrong, no matter how in love people are. But I've learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means stepping back. Even when you think they're making a mistake. You can't parent an adult the way you parent a child. If it all works out, I'll be thrilled. If it doesn't, I'll be here when he needs me. Without the "I told you so." That's what love looks like now. Not control, not warnings. Just being there. Quietly when it counts. Final update. The wedding happened last month, and I can finally breathe again. It feels strange writing about it now that everything's over. For months, I had this knot in my stomach about how it would go. Whether I'd even feel welcome, or if people would whisper about the prenup fight. But the day came, and it wasn't what I expected at all. The ceremony was beautiful. It was held outdoors at a vineyard about an hour outside the city. The weather was perfect. That kind of golden late summer light that makes everything look softer. Brooke walked down the aisle looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine, and my son Ethan looked happier than I've ever seen him. When he saw her, he got this nervous, emotional smile on his face that reminded me of him as a kid. For the first time in a long while, I just felt proud, not worried. At the reception, Brooke's parents greeted me warmly. Her mom even hugged me and said, "Let's start fresh." I almost cried right there. I think she finally understood I wasn't trying to sabotage anything. Sometimes emotions just take time to cool off. Brooke and I had a moment together later that night. She came over while I was sitting off to the side watching them dance and said, "Thank you for being here." "It means a lot," I told her. "You're family now." "Of course I'm here." She hugged me. A real hug. Not the polite kind. And I realized how much I'd been holding on to guilt. I'd been so afraid I'd ruined our relationship before it even began. But that moment told me we were okay. The next day, after everyone checked out of the hotel, Ethan and I went for coffee before heading home. It was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You were right about one thing." I raised an eyebrow and said, "Only one?" He laughed. "That a marriage means having hard conversations. We had some brutal ones after all that prenup stuff. but I think it made us stronger. He told me that, even though they decided against signing one, they ended up talking through how they'd handle money, debt, and the business if things ever went south. He said it wasn't an easy talk, but it forced them to be completely honest about finances. They decided to keep separate accounts for now and share expenses proportionally based on income. They also made a written agreement, not a legal prenup, but a signed understanding about his business. He said, "I know it's not exactly what you wanted, but it's something. And honestly, we never would have done it if you hadn't brought it up." Hearing that hit me hard. I didn't say much, just told him I was proud of him. Since then, things between us have been better than they've been in years. We talk more often, not just about money or responsibilities, but real things. He'll call just to say hi or send me pictures of the new patio project he's working on. Brooke texts me sometimes too, photos of their dog, a new recipe she tried, little updates about her students. It feels normal again, and I didn't realize how much I missed that until it came back. The funny thing is, the prenup argument ended up doing exactly what I wanted, just not the way I expected. It made Ethan think critically about his marriage. It made Brooke reflect on what partnership really means, and it made me realize I have to let go a little, to trust the person I raised to make his own choices. I still think prenups are smart. That's never going to change. But I also learned that timing and delivery matter. What I meant as protection came off as doubt. I didn't realize that by leading with conditions, I made him feel like my love had a price tag. That wasn't my intention, but I understand why he felt that way. Sometimes you think you're teaching your kids how to be cautious, but they end up teaching you how to have faith. Faith in them, in their judgment, and in the fact that even if they fall, they'll get back up, just like you did. Last weekend, Ethan and Brooke came over for dinner. We grilled on the back porch, and for the first time in a long time, it felt easy. No tension, no tiptoeing, just laughter and stories. At one point, Brooke raised her glass and said, "To complicated families figuring it out anyway." I smiled, because that's exactly what we are. Before they left, Ethan hugged me tight and said, "You know, you were never wrong, Mom. You just loved me too loudly." I think that's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. So here's where I'm at now. They're married, they're happy, and I've stopped worrying about trying to control how life treats them. I did my job. He's a grown man, married to a good woman who loves him. That's enough. And when they finally get around to buying a house or having kids, or if someday life throws them curveballs, I'll be right here, cheering them on, ready to help if they ask. But not to control, not to push, just to love them. For the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. Stories number 7. Cutting ties after losing both of my parents. When I was 15, my parents divorced. It wasn't one of those mutual, peaceful separations either. It was messy, loud, and full of bitterness. My mom, Ellen, remarried a year later to a man named Steve, who had 2 daughters, Megan and Paige. My dad, Robert, remarried 2 years after that to a woman named Linda, who had a son, Josh. For most of my teenage years, I lived with my mom and Steve. My dad lived 2 towns over, and I'd visit him every other weekend. It wasn't ideal, but I tried to keep the peace. My mom used to tell me that families don't have to be perfect to be loving. But I don't think she ever realized how lonely I felt in the middle of all that blending. Steve was decent enough in public. Everyone thought he was this great stepdad. Charming, funny, reliable. But behind closed doors, he was strict to the point of being controlling. He made it clear that his house ran by his rules. If I didn't clean to his standards, he'd criticize me. If I got a B instead of an A, he'd call me lazy. My mom usually stayed quiet. She'd tell me later to just pick my battles. Megan and Paige were around my age, and we were civil at first, but we were never close. They had their own little world, inside jokes and routines. Whenever we argued, Steve would take their side, no matter what. One time, Megan borrowed my favorite hoodie, spilled soda on it, and blamed me for leaving it in her space. I got grounded for being disrespectful. That was kind of the tone for the rest of high school. My dad's side wasn't much better. Linda was the picture-perfect kind of woman. All smiles at family dinners, church every Sunday, but underneath that, she had this passive-aggressive way of making me feel like I didn't belong. She'd make comments like, "Your mom really didn't teach you to cook, huh?" Or, "You're so quiet. Robert says you're just like Ellen." I tried to tough it out. I told myself I'd only have to survive a few more years before I could move out and build my own life. And I did. I got into a state university, found a small apartment, and worked part-time to cover what scholarships didn't. But life doesn't wait to kick you when you're down. When I was 21, my mom got diagnosed with breast cancer. It happened fast. She fought hard, but within a year she was gone. I remember Steve calling me after she passed, sounding almost mechanical. "You should come home and help with arrangements," he said. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm so sorry," just orders. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing next to him, trying not to cry too loudly. Steve gave a long speech about how my mom completed him. And the whole time I stood there thinking about how he used to talk to her when no one else was around. The sighs, the irritation, the way he'd call her overly emotional, it made my stomach twist. After she died, Steve told me I could still come home for holidays. But it felt like an empty invitation. I didn't belong there anymore. My mom was the only real connection, and without her, the house was just walls and silence. A year later, tragedy struck again. My dad died in a car accident on his way to work. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of pain before. Losing both parents before I was 23, Linda took over everything. The funeral, the estate, the insurance. She kept me informed in the most minimal, detached way possible. "You'll get your share of the insurance once everything clears," she said, like she was talking about taxes. Not my dad. After both funerals, both step-parents acted like they were suddenly my only family. Steve would text me things like, "You know, your mom would want you to keep in touch." Linda left voicemails saying, "Your father loved you so much. I want to keep you in my life." For him. But I didn't feel love in any of it. I felt obligation, pressure, guilt. At first, I tried to respond. I sent polite texts, made small talk, tried to check in on holidays. But every time, it felt like I was being pulled back into something that wasn't real. Steve would guilt-trip me for not visiting enough. "Your mother would be disappointed you've forgotten us." Linda would tell me how Josh was like a brother to me now. Even though we'd barely spoken in years, it all came to a head last Christmas. Steve called and said he was hosting a family dinner and expected me there. I told him I had to work overtime. He said, "You always have an excuse." Then he said something that hit me hard. "You're being selfish. Family doesn't just disappear because one person dies." I almost laughed. One person? My mom wasn't just one person. She was everything. After that call, I realized I didn't owe these people anything. They weren't my parents. They weren't my family. They were people who happened to marry the people who raised me. And when those people were gone, so was the connection, so I stopped replying. No texts, no calls, no holiday cards. I blocked Steve first, then Linda. At first, it felt wrong, like I was betraying my parents' memories. But over time, it felt freeing. I started therapy a few months later, and my therapist told me something that stuck with me. You can honor your parents without maintaining relationships that cause you pain. Since then, I've learned to rebuild from the ground up. I've made my own little family. My best friend Hannah, her fiancé, and their dog. We have Sunday dinners sometimes, and it feels more like home than any blended family dinner ever did. A few weeks ago, Steve sent me a long letter through the mail. It wasn't hateful, but it was full of guilt trips. "You're all I have left of your mom. I don't understand how you can just erase us." I read it once and then put it away. I didn't respond. Linda sent me an email too, asking if I'd attend a memorial gathering for my dad. I didn't go. I lit a candle for him in my apartment instead and played his favorite song quietly while I looked through old photos. That felt right. That felt personal. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being cold or ungrateful. These people didn't abuse me. Not physically, at least, but they never felt like home. And now, without my parents, keeping them in my life feels like pretending, so I cut ties completely. It's been over a year since I last spoke to either of them. I'm still grieving, but at least now it's on my own terms. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not fixing everything, but learning where to stop trying. Update. It's been almost 9 months since I went completely no contact with Steve and Linda. And I wanted to write an update because something unexpected happened that forced me to think about my decision all over again. After I stopped replying to them, things went quiet for a while. I thought maybe they'd just let it be. I didn't expect them to understand, but I hoped they'd at least respect my boundaries. But in February, I got a letter from Steve's attorney. At first, I panicked. My hands were literally shaking when I opened it. It wasn't anything threatening, but it was a notice of intent for something involving my mom's estate. Apparently, my mom's old life insurance policy had a minor beneficiary mix-up, something she hadn't updated after marrying Steve. He'd been the primary, but I was listed as secondary. And now that some funds were being released years later, there was confusion about entitlement. I didn't even know this policy existed. I had to dig through old boxes at my apartment to find the paperwork, which brought back so many memories, her handwriting, old sticky notes that smelled faintly like her favorite perfume. I ended up sitting on my living room floor and crying for an hour straight. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that her handwriting still felt more like home than anything that came after she died. When I contacted the insurance company, they said the issue could be easily resolved if Steve and I both signed off on a release. I didn't want to talk to him directly, but I agreed to do it through email. He responded within an hour, not with a thank you or even a hi. Just, I'm glad you finally reached out. We need to talk. I ignored that part and focused strictly on the paperwork. But then he sent another email the next day. I don't understand why you're so angry. Ellen would be heartbroken that you've abandoned her family. Megan and Paige ask about you all the time. You're throwing away everyone who still loves you. That message sent me right back to being 17 again. Small, cornered, like I owed everyone an explanation for just existing. I didn't respond. I signed what I needed to, sent it to the insurance company, and made it clear I didn't want further contact. But then, 2 weeks later, I got a Facebook message from Paige. We hadn't spoken in years. And her message started with, "Hey, I don't know why you're being so cold, but Dad's been really hurt. I don't even use Facebook anymore." So seeing her name pop up made my stomach drop. She said Steve had been depressed since I cut him off, and that I was like a daughter to him. She even wrote, "Mom would want you to forgive." It took me a few days to figure out how to respond, but I finally sent back a short message. "I'm sorry he's hurting, but I need distance for my own healing. This isn't about hate, it's about peace." She read it, didn't reply, and I blocked her too. It sounds harsh when I say it out loud, blocking people who were technically my family. But the piece that came afterward told me I did the right thing. For years I carried guilt like it was my inheritance. Guilt for not being close enough, not being grateful enough, not being the kind of stepchild who just blended in perfectly. But I realized something in therapy recently. I never owed them emotional labor just because they married my parents. Linda reached out too, in her own way. She mailed me a card for my dad's birthday in March. Inside she wrote, "You'll always be his little girl, and I'll always care for you like my own." It should have been comforting, but instead, it made me angry, because she said "like my own," as if that was ever true. When I was younger, she barely tolerated me. I was polite, quiet, did my homework, and still, nothing I did was ever enough. I didn't reply, I shredded the envelope, but I did keep the card. Not because I wanted it, but because I didn't want to forget how that message made me feel. Sometimes keeping a reminder of what you've outgrown helps you stay grounded. The hardest part of all this, though, is the loneliness that sneaks in at weird times. There's no home base to go to anymore, no parents to call when life gets heavy, no family dinners. Sometimes, when I visit friends who still have their parents, I feel like an outsider watching something I'll never get back. But slowly, I've started building something new. I joined a local grief support group this spring, a mix of people who've lost parents, siblings, and partners. It's raw and real and not always easy. But for the first time in years, I feel understood. There's one woman, Carol, who lost both her parents within a year like me. We talk after meetings sometimes, and she said something that stuck with me. You don't have to hold on to people just because they shared a house with your memories. That hit me hard. I've also started volunteering once a week at a community center that helps foster kids transition into adulthood. Most of them don't have family either. And in a strange way, it makes me feel less alone. I guess when you've lost your foundation, you start learning how to build a new one, brick by brick. Lately, I've been thinking about my mom and dad more peacefully. Instead of remembering their deaths, I remember the little things. The way my dad would hum old Fleetwood Mac songs while cooking breakfast. The way my mom would leave handwritten notes in my lunchbox even in high school. "You're going to crush it today. Love you." I'm trying to live in a way that would make them proud. Not by holding on to broken connections, but by choosing peace. A few days ago, I went through an old photo album I hadn't opened since college. Tucked inside was a picture of me, my mom, and Steve at a Christmas party when I was 16. She looked happy. He had his arm around her for a moment. I wondered if maybe cutting him off dishonored her memory. But then I realized she loved him for who he was to her, not for who he was to me. I can love my mom and still choose not to carry her choices. So that's where I am now. Healing, learning, letting go. Sometimes family isn't about blood or marriage or shared holidays. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you're rebuilding from nothing. The friends who bring soup when you're sick, who listen without judging, who don't guilt you for choosing yourself. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that grief doesn't always mean holding tighter. Sometimes real healing means knowing when to finally let go. Final update. It's been just over a year and a half since I wrote that last update, and reading back on it now, I can see how much I've grown. Not just in the way I deal with loss, but in how I understand boundaries, love, and family. What happened next wasn't dramatic, like some big revelation or confrontation. It was a quiet series of moments that slowly closed the chapter for good. About 6 months ago, I got another letter. This time, it wasn't from Steve or Linda, but from an attorney representing Steve's estate. My stomach dropped the moment I saw his name. It turns out Steve had passed away suddenly from a heart attack in early spring. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years at that point. The letter said I was mentioned in his will. That threw me. My first reaction was guilt, then confusion, then sadness that surprised me with how deep it went. For all the resentment and frustration I'd carried, Steve was still a major figure in my life. For most of my teen years, he'd been the man at our dinner table, the voice that told me when to be home, the person standing next to my mom in every photo. Even if the relationship was strained, his presence had shaped so much of who I became, both the good and the bad. I sat in my car outside my apartment for almost an hour before I could bring myself to open the packet. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Steve's blocky, careful handwriting, along with the formal paperwork. The letter wasn't long. He wrote, "I know I wasn't the easiest person to live with. I loved your mother more than I could ever say, and I didn't know how to love you without feeling like I was replacing her. I hope one day you'll forgive me for the ways I failed. I'm leaving you something small, not because I think you owe me anything, but because you were part of our life, and Ellen would want me to make sure you're okay." The inheritance wasn't huge, just a few $1,000s and a small keepsake box that my mom had apparently wanted me to have but was stored at his place. Inside the box were photos, her wedding ring, a few old notes, and a bracelet I'd given her when I was 10. That broke me. For the first time since I cut him off, I cried for Steve, not for the stepdad he was, but for the man who had loved my mom in his own flawed way and who, in the end, had tried to make peace. I didn't forgive everything, but I did understand him a little more. After that, I decided to go to his memorial. It wasn't a big event, just a small gathering at a local church. Megan and Paige were there. When they saw me, both of them froze. Then Megan walked over and just hugged me. We didn't say anything for a long time. It was one of those heavy, wordless hugs that said everything we hadn't for years. Later, Paige came up and said quietly, "He talked about you a lot at the end. He always said he wished he'd done things differently. We talked for a while, about our parents, about how weird life becomes after loss, about how we'd all just been kids trying to navigate adults' decisions. It wasn't a reconciliation, not really, but it was closure. We exchanged numbers, and while we don't talk often, there's a quiet respect there now. Not forced, not guilt-driven, just mutual understanding that we all lost the same person." In different ways, after Steve's memorial, I found myself thinking about Linda too. I hadn't heard from her in months. I debated reaching out, not because I missed her, but because I wanted to end things on a more peaceful note. I ended up sending a short letter. Nothing heavy, just, "I hope you're doing well. I've been doing better, and healing in my own way. Thank you for taking care of Dad when he was alive. I wish you peace." She never wrote back, and that's okay. For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely okay with silence. In the time since all of this, my world has gotten smaller but brighter. My grief group became something of a chosen family. Carol, the woman who lost both her parents too, and I have become close friends. We started hosting monthly dinners for others in our group. We cook, we share stories, and we light a candle for the people we've lost. I also finally took a solo trip, something I'd been too scared to do before. I went to Oregon, where my mom had always wanted to visit the coast. I took one of her old scarves, stood on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, and let the wind take it. It felt like setting her free all over again. And maybe setting myself free too. Professionally, I've been doing better than ever. I got promoted to a project lead at my job, and I started saving toward buying my own place. I'm not rushing it, but the idea of having a home that's entirely mine feels symbolic. No ghosts, no expectations, no old arguments echoing through the walls, and emotionally, I'm still healing, but the heaviness doesn't control me anymore. I used to wake up feeling like I was betraying my parents just by choosing distance. Now I understand that honoring them doesn't mean clinging to pain. It means living well, kindly, and authentically, the way they would have wanted. Every so often, I still get dreams about my parents. Sometimes they're together, sometimes separate. The last one I had, we were sitting at our old kitchen table, and my mom was laughing while my dad played some goofy joke. I remember telling them in the dream, "It's okay now, you can rest." When I woke up, I wasn't crying. I just felt warm. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that grief doesn't always end. It just changes shape. The people we lose become part of the silence, part of the small things. The smell of coffee in the morning, a song on the radio, a photograph you can't throw away. And as for family, I've stopped defining it by blood or marriage or expectation. Family, I've realized, are the people who choose you without condition, who make room for your pain without making you earn their love. So, no, I don't regret cutting contact. I don't regret setting boundaries. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary because sometimes, the bravest way to love your past is to stop letting it define your future. And now, I finally feel like I'm living mine. Stories number 8. My quiet confession about loving one daughter more. I never thought I'd be the kind of parent who would admit this. Not even to myself, much less to the internet. But here I am. I love both my daughters, I truly do. But I like one of them more. Even typing that feels like swallowing glass. I'm 45. I've spent nearly 2 decades trying to raise them right, trying to keep things fair, trying to be the kind of mother who doesn't play favorites. But the truth is that I'm failing, and lately it's starting to show. My girls are Hannah, who's 17, and Lily, who's 16. They're only 13 months apart, what people call Irish twins. When they were little, everyone thought it was adorable. Matching dresses, matching lunchboxes, back-to-back birthdays. But what they don't tell you is how different 2 kids that close in age can be. Hannah was the easy baby. She slept through the night early, followed rules, smiled for pictures, said please and thank you. She's still like that now. Responsible, organized, kind. She's the one teachers email me about to say, "You must be so proud." Then there's Lily. She came into the world like a thunderstorm. Loud, bright, impossible to ignore. She was colicky as a baby, wild as a toddler, and now as a teenager. She's the one who slams doors, argues with everything I say, and seems allergic to peace. I know teenagers are supposed to be difficult, but with Lily, it's like every day is a new battle. She's emotional, defensive, and quick to take everything personally. And I'm ashamed to admit that when she starts yelling, I can feel something ugly in me switch off. I just want to escape, to be anywhere else. The difference between them feels like a spotlight that I can't turn off. Last week, Hannah got her acceptance letter to a summer science program at a university out of state. We all celebrated. Balloons, cake, photos. Lily sat at the table scrolling her phone, barely looking up. "Later," she muttered. "Guess you finally got your perfect daughter." That one stung, because it was too close to the truth. After she said that, I snapped. I told her, "You could have amazing things too if you put half the effort in that your sister does." She yelled that I never believe in her, that I always compare them, and stormed off. I stood there, holding my coffee cup, realizing she was crying. Not angry crying, but the quiet kind. The kind that makes you want to go after her. But I didn't. I froze, because honestly, in that moment, I didn't know how to comfort her. I just felt tired. That's when I realized I'd become my mother. When I was growing up, my mom clearly favored my younger brother. He was the golden child. Polite, charming, always making her proud. I was the difficult one, the moody one. I spent years trying to earn her approval, and I swore I'd never make my kids feel that way. Yet here I am, doing the same thing to my own daughter. The worst part? Hannah knows. She's too smart not to. She doesn't gloat or anything. She's actually incredibly gentle with Lily. Maybe too much. Sometimes she even steps back when she notices I'm giving her more attention. She'll say things like, "Let Lily choose dinner," or "Mom, I think Lily wanted to talk to you." It breaks my heart that she's parenting around me. 2 nights ago, Lily came home past curfew. Again. I was furious. She said she was at a friend's house, but she wouldn't give me details. I grounded her for a week, and she shouted that I only cared about controlling her, not about her. I told her she was being dramatic. She yelled, "You just wish I was Hannah," and then ran to her room. I stood outside her door for what felt like an hour. Listening to her cry, I kept thinking, say something. Just tell her she's wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down, she wasn't entirely wrong yesterday. I had coffee with my friend Rachel, who's known my kids since they were babies. She said something that gutted me. You know, Lily is starting to look like you when you're angry. That same expression you get when you're trying not to cry. I went home and cried in the car before going inside. It hit me that I've been punishing Lily for being like me, for being emotional, messy, sensitive. All the things I was told to suppress when I was her age. Meanwhile, Hannah is everything I wanted to be. Calm, admired, in control. Of course I gravitate toward her. She represents the version of myself I wish I'd been. Now I'm terrified I've already done too much damage. Tonight, I tried something different. When Lily came down for dinner, I asked her to help me cook. Normally, she'd roll her eyes, but this time she hesitated and said, "Sure, we made pasta." It was quiet at first, but then she started telling me about a fight her friend group had at school. I just listened, didn't interrupt, didn't lecture. Just let her talk halfway through. She looked at me like she didn't believe I was actually listening. And for a second, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to bring me drawings and beg me to hang them on the fridge. When she went to bed, she said, "Good night, Mom." She hasn't said that in months, after she went upstairs. Hannah came in from work and noticed the pasta leftovers. She smiled and said, "Looks like you and Lily had a good night," I told her. "We did." And she just nodded, like she knew it was a bigger deal than I was saying. I don't know how to fix years of quiet favoritism. I don't even know if it's possible to erase the damage. But I'm trying. I think the first step is admitting it. Not just here, but to myself, and maybe one day to both of them. Because I do love them both, equally. But I've realized love isn't just a feeling. It's the effort to keep showing up. Especially for the one who makes it hard. Maybe that's what being a parent really is. Loving the kid who reminds you of the worst parts of yourself until you both start to heal. And maybe one day she'll believe that too. Update. I didn't expect so many people to respond when I first wrote that post. I wasn't looking for validation or advice. I think I just needed to say it out loud. To admit what I'd been hiding under layers of guilt. But reading through the comments, especially the ones from parents who had been in the same place, hit me hard. A few people even said, "You're not a bad mom for having favorites. You're just human. What matters is what you do with that awareness." Those words stuck with me. It's been 6 months now, and a lot has changed in my house. Not all of it's neat or pretty, but it's real. I started therapy 3 months ago with a woman named Dr. Keaton. She's direct in the kind of way that makes you uncomfortable at first. But she's also warm enough that you end up crying before you realize it's happening. The first thing she told me was, "You can't fix the relationship with Lily until you forgive yourself for the way you've treated her." I thought that sounded ridiculous at first. Forgive myself? For what? Being tired? Trying my best? But the more I unpacked it, the more I saw how much resentment I'd been carrying. Not just toward Lily, but toward myself. Every time she acted out, I'd see a reflection of my own teenage chaos. And instead of compassion, I'd feel shame. Therapy made me see that I wasn't reacting to Lily, I was reacting to me. Around that same time, Hannah left for her summer science program in North Carolina. It's her first time living away from home, and while I miss her, it's been clarifying. Without her here, there's no one to unconsciously compare Lily to. No constant mirror of perfection hanging around the house. It's just me and Lily. The first week was rough. I tried to bridge the gap with small talk, and she wasn't having it. Every time I asked about her day, she'd shrug and say, "Fine," but I kept trying. Cooking her favorite meals, leaving her little notes on the fridge, driving her to school even when she insisted she could walk. I didn't push too hard, just stayed consistent. Then, one night, we had a breakthrough. We were watching a movie, some moody indie thing she picked, and out of nowhere, she said, "You always liked Hannah more, didn't you?" I froze. My instinct was to say, "That's not true." But I stopped myself. Lying wasn't going to heal anything, so I said, "I've made it seem that way sometimes, haven't I?" She didn't look at me, just kept watching the screen. "You don't even try to hide it," I told her. "I'm sorry, Lily. I know I've been unfair, and I know that's hurt you. You deserve better than that." For a long time, she didn't say anything. I thought I'd ruined it, but then she whispered, "You used to love when I drew stuff for you, and then one day you stopped putting them on the fridge. I felt my throat close. I'd forgotten about that. The next morning, I found one of her old sketchbooks in the garage and hung one of her drawings on the fridge. Just quietly. Didn't say anything. When she came home from school, she saw it, stared for a second, and walked straight to her room. I figured she was mad. But that night, she came downstairs and asked if I wanted to see her new sketch. She hasn't shared anything with me in years. Since then, things have been different. Not perfect. Not some made-for-TV reconciliation, but real. We've had small moments that mean the world to me now. Like the Saturday she helped me plant flowers in the backyard. Or the time she called me from school just to ask if I wanted anything from the coffee shop near campus. Or how she texts me random memes now. The way she used to when she was little. She still rolls her eyes, still tests boundaries. Still storms off sometimes, but when she does, I don't match her anger anymore. I try to see the scared, sensitive kid underneath. I remind myself she's not rejecting me. She's testing if I'll stay. And I do, every time. Hannah came home last weekend for a short visit, and I could tell she noticed the difference. At dinner, she joked, "Wow, you two don't sound like you're in a Cold War anymore." Lily laughed and threw a napkin at her. It was such a simple, stupid moment, but it felt like peace. Later that night, after they'd both gone to bed, I stood in the hallway looking at their closed doors. I thought about how I'd spent years treating love like a finite resource, like giving more to one meant less for the other. But that's not true. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies when you give it freely. I'm still learning, still unlearning. Sometimes I catch myself slipping, praising Hannah too much, sighing when Lily forgets something. But now I catch it, I apologize, I repair. And that's something I never saw my own mother do. The other day, Lily said, "You've been trying really hard lately." It wasn't said sarcastically, just quiet observation. I told her, "I am trying." She nodded and said, "I can tell." That was better than any, "I love you." Maybe this is what motherhood really looks like. Messy, uneven, humbling, but full of second chances. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling guilty for the years I favored one over the other. But guilt isn't useless if it pushes you to grow. And if I've learned anything in the last 6 months, it's this. Loving your kids equally doesn't mean loving them the same. It means seeing who they are, and showing up for them in the way they need you to. That's what I'm trying to do now, for both of them. Final update. I wasn't sure I'd ever write here again. But tonight I found myself scrolling through my old posts. I read that first one. The one where I admitted I liked one of my daughters more. And I cried. Not because I still feel that way, but because I can finally look at that version of myself with compassion instead of disgust. It's been 4 years since then. Hannah is 21 now and finishing her senior year at Northwestern. She's majoring in biochemistry and already has interviews lined up for grad school. Lily just turned 20 and goes to a small art college in Oregon. If you had told me 4 years ago that she'd be the one to leave home first, I wouldn't have believed you. But she did, and she did it beautifully. The summer after my last update, Lily got accepted into an art program across the country. When she told me, she looked nervous, like she expected me to talk her out of it. I didn't. I hugged her instead and said, "You're going to do great." I meant it. For the first time in a long time, she believed me. Helping her pack for that move was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every t-shirt I folded felt like a little goodbye. I cried in the car after dropping her at the airport. Not the soft kind of crying either. The ugly, gasping kind. Because I finally realized how much I would miss her. How much I loved her not in spite of who she was, but because of who she was. That was the moment I knew the favoritism was gone. Over the past few years, our relationship has grown into something honest. She calls me at random times, sometimes to vent, sometimes just to show me a painting she's working on. We text memes, share playlists, and sometimes she'll just send, "Hey, love you." That small message used to be unthinkable. Last Christmas, she came home with a sketchbook she'd made for her final project. On the first page was a portrait of me. It wasn't flattering. I looked tired, lines under my eyes, hair messy, but it was real. At the bottom, she'd written, "For Mom, who finally saw me, I had to excuse myself and go cry in the bathroom." Hannah, meanwhile, is still the golden girl in a lot of ways. But even that has changed. When she comes home, she's less perfect, more human. I think she started to see that she doesn't have to be the easy one to be loved. We've had long talks about how she used to hold herself back, trying not to make Lily feel overshadowed. I told her I was sorry for putting her in that position, for making her carry the balance in our family when it was never her job. She cried, hugged me, and said, "You did your best, Mom." We all grew up together, and she was right. We did grow up together, me included. One night last month, both girls were home for a weekend. We made dinner together, just like we used to. Lily handled the music, Hannah set the table, and I watched them laugh and tease each other over garlic bread and spilled sauce. There was no tension, no competition, no weight hanging in the air. Just family. After dinner, Lily went upstairs, and Hannah stayed behind to help me clean up. She said, "You know, Lily really likes talking about you now. She brags about you in her classes." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she shook her head. "I'm serious. She says you're her favorite person to talk to when she's stuck on a project. Says you always get it." I don't think she'll ever understand what that did to me. Later that night, when I went upstairs, I saw a text from Lily. "Thanks for dinner. I miss this sometimes. You make home feel safe." I sat there for a long time staring at that message, because 4 years ago, safe is the last word I would have used to describe our relationship. But now it fits. It hasn't all been perfect, of course. There were still fights, moments when old wounds reopened, when I caught myself slipping into the patterns I thought I'd broken. But now I name them. I say, "I'm sorry. I just realized I was doing it again." And both of them have learned to say, "It's okay, Mom. We know you're trying." That's the gift of repair. It doesn't erase the past, but it softens it. I've also had to face my own mother in a different way. She passed last year, and while we weren't close, her death forced me to confront how much I'd inherited from her. The silence, the comparisons, the conditional affection. For a long time, I hated her for it. But standing at her funeral, looking at the pictures of her as a young woman, I realized she was just doing what she knew. Maybe that's the secret. Every generation just trying to do a little better than the one before. A few weeks ago, I visited Lily's art show. Her exhibit was called Inheritance. One of the pieces was a pair of hands. One older, one younger, covered in paint, holding each other. The caption read, "Love doesn't start over, it keeps going." When I read that, I felt like my chest cracked open. Later that night, we went to dinner and she said, "You know, Mom, I used to think you hated me." I told her, "I never hated you. I hated how much I saw myself in you, and I didn't know how to handle that." She smiled and said, "I know, but I think we both figured it out." And she's right. We did. Now, when I think about my daughters, I don't think about which one I like more. I think about how differently they love me, and how lucky I am to be loved by both. Hannah with her steady calm, always grounding me. Lily with her messy, emotional fire, always reminding me that connection isn't quiet. It's alive. I still keep one of Lily's drawings on the fridge. It's faded now, curling at the edges, but it's staying right there. A reminder of the night we started to rebuild everything. If that scared, a shamed version of me from 4 years ago could see us now, laughing in the kitchen, sharing secrets, forgiving, really forgiving. I think she'd finally breathe, and maybe she'd understand that motherhood isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about never giving up on the chance to do better, because I didn't, and neither did they. Stories number 9. My roommate's boyfriend kept sleeping in my bed when I wasn't home. When I first moved in with my roommate, I thought I'd lucked out. She was clean, easy to talk to, and we got along right away. Her name's Kayla, and we found the apartment through a mutual friend. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath setup in Nashville. Nothing fancy, but it's cozy and close to both of our jobs. For the first few months, everything was perfect. We split chores evenly, cooked together sometimes, and even watched shows at night like a couple of sisters. Then her boyfriend Derek started staying over more often. At first I didn't mind. I figured it's her place too, and I wasn't going to be the roommate who complained about someone's partner being around. Derek seemed fine. Polite, kind of quiet. The typical guy who tries not to overstep. He'd crash on weekends, sometimes bring pizza or a bottle of wine for all of us. But after a while, his visits went from weekends to basically living here. It wasn't a huge deal at first, but it started to bug me how comfortable he got. He'd leave his stuff all over the bathroom, help himself to my coffee, and once I came home to find him using my laptop because his phone died and he needed to check something for work, I let it go, but I made a mental note that I didn't like it. Then, a few weeks later, something weird happened. I came home early from a work trip, 2 days ahead of schedule. I opened the apartment door, expecting to see an empty place, and instead found Derek asleep in my bed. I stood there in shock for a good 10 seconds before saying anything. He woke up immediately, all groggy and startled, and sat up like he was caught committing a crime. I asked, "What are you doing in my bed?" And he mumbled something about being tired and that my room looked more comfortable. I didn't even know what to say. My sheets, my pillows, my bed, I told him to get out. And he did, quickly. But he didn't even look embarrassed, just sort of shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. When Kayla got home that night, I told her what happened. She looked horrified at first, but then started downplaying it. "I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it," she said. "He probably just wanted to take a nap and didn't think you'd mind," I said. "Of course I mind. That's disgusting and invasive. Who sleeps in someone else's bed?" She apologized and said she'd talk to him, but the apology felt half-hearted. For a few days, things seemed fine. Derek didn't come around as much, and I started to relax. But about 2 weeks later, I noticed my comforter looked weird, like it had been pulled off and then put back hastily. I brushed it off at first, but something in my gut felt off. So the next time I left for work, I did something I'm not proud of. I set up my old iPad on a shelf, camera pointed at the bed. When I came home that night, I checked the footage, and there he was, Derek. Lying in my bed again, I watched, furious, as he walked into my room around noon, pulled back the covers, and took a full-on nap. He even grabbed one of my pillows and hugged it like it was his. I was shaking. It wasn't just gross. It felt like such a violation. I didn't even confront him this time. I texted Kayla and told her we needed to talk that night. When she came home, I played the video for her without saying a word. She just sat there frozen. Then she said, "Okay, that's not okay." "I'll talk to him," I said. "No, you don't need to talk to him. He's not welcome here anymore. If you want to see him, do it somewhere else." She got defensive. "You can't tell me who I can or can't have over," I said. "I can if he keeps breaking boundaries. He's literally sleeping in my bed. That's not just inconsiderate. That's creepy." We went back and forth for nearly an hour. She tried to reason that he probably just liked my mattress better. I have a memory foam topper. Or that he didn't mean to make me uncomfortable. I told her intention didn't matter. What mattered was that he knew it was wrong and did it anyway. Eventually, she said she'd talk to him and figure it out. But she looked mad, like I was the problem. A couple of days later, she told me Derek admitted to it but said he didn't think it was that big of a deal. He apologized if it made me uncomfortable. That word alone made my skin crawl. After that, things in the apartment got tense. Kayla barely talked to me. I started locking my bedroom door every time I left, which made me feel like a stranger in my own place. The trust was gone. One night, about a week later, I came home and found my bedroom door slightly open. My heart dropped. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I opened it and saw my comforter tossed aside again. I didn't need proof this time. I just knew. I packed a bag that night and stayed at my sister's place. The next morning, I called the landlord to ask about breaking my lease. Luckily, he was understanding, apparently. I wasn't the first tenant who'd had issues with roommates bringing people over constantly. He said if I found a replacement, he'd let me off early. I texted Kayla and told her I was moving out by the end of the month. She sent me one message back: "Do what you have to do." No apology. No attempt to fix it, just that it took me 2 weeks to find a new place. When I came to get the last of my stuff, she wasn't home. But Derek's shoes were by the door. I didn't say a word. I just took my things, locked up, and left my key on the counter. Looking back, I keep thinking about how something so small, sharing space, can turn into something so creepy and disrespectful. I don't think Derek was doing anything sexual or malicious. But honestly, it doesn't even matter. Sleeping in someone else's bed without permission crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. I haven't spoken to either of them since. A few mutual friends told me they moved to a new place together, and I can only wish them luck, though I doubt I'll ever see them again. Now I double-check locks, keep my personal space guarded, and don't trust anyone just because they seem nice. Living with strangers teaches you how quickly comfort can turn into caution. It still gives me the creeps to think about Derek in my bed. Using my pillow like he belonged there, I changed everything when I moved. New mattress, new sheets, even new pillows. Maybe it sounds dramatic, but I needed that clean slate. If I've learned anything from that experience, it's that boundaries aren't negotiable. And when someone shows you they don't respect yours, you don't wait for it to get worse. You get out. A few months after I moved out, I honestly thought I was done with the whole situation. I had a new apartment, a quiet roommate named Jess, and I finally started to relax again. I even bought a lockbox for my valuables and laughed at myself for being overly cautious. But that experience with Kayla and Derek left this permanent edge in me. Like I always had to look over my shoulder a little. Then one night, out of nowhere, I got a text from Kayla. It had been almost 5 months since I'd heard from her. The message said, "Hey, can we talk? I owe you an apology." At first I almost didn't respond. My stomach twisted when I saw her name pop up. But curiosity got the better of me. I told her I was free for coffee the next morning, figuring it couldn't hurt to hear what she had to say. When I saw her at the cafe, she looked different, tired, a little thinner, like she hadn't been sleeping well. She hugged me when I walked in, which I didn't return. I just sat down and waited. She started by saying she was sorry for everything that happened, that she hadn't realized how serious it was when Derek kept crossing boundaries. "I thought you were overreacting," she said quietly. "But I was wrong. I didn't say anything, just let her talk." She told me she and Derek had broken up. Apparently, it didn't take long for his weird behavior to start showing up again. But this time, directed at her. She said he started getting possessive, showing up at her job. And one night she came home to find him in her apartment, when she hadn't given him a key. He claimed she must have left it unlocked. That's when it hit me that what I went through wasn't just rude or inconsiderate. It was a pattern. Derek had issues with boundaries, period. Kayla said she kicked him out for good after that and changed her locks. She also mentioned that when they were packing up the old apartment, she found some of my stuff that I hadn't realized was missing. A hoodie, a book, and weirdly one of my old pillowcases. She said she thought Derek might have taken them. That part made my skin crawl. I asked her point blank if she thought he'd been doing anything else in my room. She swore she didn't think so, that she would have said something if she had. But I could see she was uncomfortable, like she didn't want to think too deeply about it either. She started crying halfway through the conversation, not loud or dramatic, just quiet tears while she tried to explain how much she regretted not believing me sooner. She said she felt guilty every day since I moved out, and honestly, I could tell she meant it. I told her I appreciated the apology, but it didn't really erase what happened. I spent months feeling unsafe because she dismissed my boundaries to protect her boyfriend's ego. Still, I didn't hate her anymore. I just didn't trust her. After that, we said goodbye, and that was that. I didn't expect to hear from her again. But a couple weeks later, I got another text from her, this time saying that Derek had tried to contact her again. He showed up at her work parking lot and asked if she'd seen me lately. That text sent a chill through me. I hadn't thought about him in months, but suddenly, it was like all that fear came rushing back. I asked how he even brought me up, and she said he told her he wanted to make things right with me, that he never meant to creep me out. I told her immediately that if he ever tried to reach out again, she should block him and let me know. That night, I checked my apartment's front door lock 3 times before going to bed. I even called a locksmith the next morning to install a deadbolt. It sounds paranoid, but something about Derek's persistence freaked me out. A few days later, I got a random friend request on Instagram from a burner account. No profile picture, no posts, but the name was a weird variation of his old handle. I blocked it right away. I wish I could say that was the end of it. But it didn't stop there. About a week later, Jess, my new roommate, told me someone had been buzzing our apartment from the front entrance earlier that afternoon while I was at work. When she answered, no one spoke. After that, I filed a report with the building management and gave them Derek's photo. Just in case, they were understanding and said they'd keep an eye out. I also called a friend who's a cop, not to file a formal police report yet, but just to ask what I should do. He told me to start documenting everything. Screenshots, dates, times, anything weird. It's been quiet since then, thankfully. I haven't seen or heard from Derek, and I don't think I will. Maybe it was just a last attempt to get attention. Maybe he realized he'd crossed every line there was. I still think about Kayla sometimes. I don't hate her. I actually pity her a bit. She got sucked into something she didn't know how to handle, and by the time she realized how off it was too late. I do believe she's learned her lesson. Though, as for me, I'm more cautious now. But I've stopped living in fear. I got a dog, a rescue mutt named Toby, who's made me feel safer than any lock ever could. And every time I walk into my apartment and see him wagging his tail, I think about how grateful I am to finally have peace again. Boundaries are something people take for granted until they're crossed. I used to think of them as polite guidelines. Now I see them as survival tools. When someone disrespects them repeatedly, that's not a misunderstanding. It's a warning. I learned mine the hard way, but I'll never ignore that feeling again. It's been about a year since everything with Derek and Kayla, and I finally feel like I can talk about it without feeling my chest tighten. A lot has happened since then, and I didn't plan on writing an update. But a few people from my old circle recently reached out about something that brought the whole situation back up in a way I didn't expect. To start with the good part, my life is finally calm. My roommate Jess ended up moving in with her boyfriend earlier this year, so I've been living alone, which honestly feels amazing. I love having full control over my space. No weird roommates, no strangers' shoes by the door, no one touching my stuff. I got new furniture, painted the walls, and even hung plants in the windows. For the first time in a long time, my apartment feels like mine. Toby, my dog, has been the best decision I've ever made. He's my little protector. He sleeps near my bedroom door every night, and even though I know he can't take down a full-grown man, that little bark of his gives me enough comfort to sleep soundly. Then, about 2 months ago, I got a message from a girl I didn't know. She found me on Facebook and said she used to date Derek. After Kayla, she said she found my name while scrolling through his tagged photos and recognized me from a post Kayla had made years ago. At first, I thought it was spam, but she sent a long message explaining that she'd recently broken up with him and that he'd made her uncomfortable in similar ways. According to her, Derek had this habit of going through her stuff, taking little things without asking, a hoodie, a pair of socks, even a necklace once. He'd also accidentally sleep in her bed when she wasn't home, saying he missed her scent. Reading that, I felt sick. She said she'd confronted him and that he'd gotten defensive, saying, "You sound just like my ex's roommate." That's when she started digging. She told me she eventually kicked him out after he refused to leave her alone. Apparently, she reached out because she wanted to warn me that he'd mentioned my full name during one of their arguments. Something about me ruining his reputation. That made my stomach drop. I hadn't talked about the situation online besides my original Reddit post, which had gone mildly viral at the time, but I'd anonymized everything. Still, it clearly stuck with him. I hadn't said anything slanderous. Everything I shared was true. But the fact that he was still talking about me a year later made me feel exposed all over again. I told her to block him, and if possible, report him if he tried to contact her again. She said she already had. I appreciated her warning. But after we stopped talking, I found myself checking my locks again, rereading old messages, and feeling that old anxiety creep back in a few weeks later. Something happened that made it all real again. One night, I came home from work, and there was a small package on my doorstep. No return address, just my name written in messy handwriting. It wasn't from Amazon or any delivery service I use. I probably should have called someone right away. But curiosity got me. I opened it. Inside was one of my old t-shirts, one I hadn't seen since the apartment with Kayla. It was folded neatly, and there was no note. Just the shirt. I froze. I recognized it immediately. It was a faded gray Nashville Predators tee I used to sleep in. I hadn't even realized it was missing when I moved. But I remembered Derek wearing it once after helping Kayla do laundry. I called Jess right away. She told me to call the police, which I did. They came, took a statement, and said they couldn't do much without proof of who sent it. But they agreed it was unsettling. I gave them Derek's name and photo. Just in case, that night I didn't sleep. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. I got my building to check the security camera footage from the hallway, but the person who left the package had a hoodie pulled up and kept their head down. The only thing I could make out was that it was a man in dark clothes. After that, I upgraded my security again. New locks, a Ring doorbell, and an indoor camera by the entryway. I even took a self-defense class. It sounds paranoid, but honestly, it made me feel like I had some control again. The police never found anything, but after that package, I never saw or heard anything else. No messages, no packages, no strange buzzing at my door. Just silence. Then last month, I got one last message from Kayla. She said she'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that Derek had moved back to his hometown in Ohio. Apparently, he'd been in some kind of legal trouble there. A restraining order from another woman he'd dated. She didn't have details, but hearing that weirdly made me feel both uneasy and relieved. I didn't respond to her message. There wasn't much to say. I still live in the same apartment, and sometimes I wonder if I should move just to wipe the slate completely clean. But every time I think about it, I look around my little space, my plants, my dog, my coffee mug collection, and realize this is my place now. Derek doesn't get to take that from me. There's a strange peace that comes from surviving something that shook your sense of safety. I don't jump at every noise anymore. But I also don't let people get away with small red flags. I listen to my gut. And I've learned that even when you can't control what people do to you, you can control how you protect yourself afterward. Every so often, I'll see an old photo of me and Kayla from before everything went downhill. We look happy, naive even. I don't feel anger when I see it now. Just a kind of bittersweet sadness. That version of me didn't know what boundaries were until someone trampled over them. Now I know better, and I'll never forget it. Stories number 10. I stopped helping my lazy coworker, and now everyone thinks I'm the bad guy. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. I've been there for about 6 years, and I've always been the type to go above and beyond. I like being reliable, and honestly, I enjoy helping people. But recently, I realized that my helpful nature was being exploited by one particular coworker, and when I finally set boundaries, suddenly I became the bad guy. Her name is Kelly 29F. She's been with the company for about 4 years. On paper, she's competent, but in practice, she consistently does the bare minimum and relies on others to cover for her mistakes. At first, I tried to help because I felt responsible. She'd ask for guidance on projects, and I thought mentoring her would be a good thing for both of us. At first, it was fine. I showed her how to use our internal software, walked her through reports, and even stayed late a few nights to help her meet deadlines. She was thankful, kind even, and I didn't mind. But over the past year, it got worse. She stopped trying to learn. She would ask the same questions repeatedly, sometimes about things I had explained to her multiple times. If a project was due, she would half complete her part, then dump it on my desk at the last minute with a smile and say, "Can you fix this?" I didn't have time. I started noticing a pattern. Every time she had a problem, my workload increased, but she never seemed to improve. I tried addressing it politely. I said things like, "Kelly, I can show you how to do this, but I can't finish your tasks for you," and she would nod. Promise to try and then do the exact same thing again. I started keeping track of how many extra hours I was putting in to cover for her. It was adding at least 10-15 hours per week to my workload. I was burning out. Then came the project that changed everything. We had a major client presentation coming up, and Kelly was supposed to prepare the financial analysis slides a week before the presentation. I realized she hadn't even started. I asked if she needed help, and she said she'd try to get it done later. I told her firmly that I could guide her, but I wouldn't be completing her slides if she didn't do them. She'd need to explain it to our manager. She looked shocked. I expected her to protest a little, but she didn't. She left the office in a huff, muttering that I was being mean and selfish. Fast forward to the day of the presentation. Kelly's slides were half done and messy. She panicked, and I stepped in just a little to help her organize them so our client wouldn't see mistakes. Our manager, Tom, 45M, noticed my name on the final slides more than hers, and assumed I had taken over the project completely. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "Kelly said you did everything for her. That's not okay. You can't be doing her work for her." I was stunned. I explained exactly what happened, that I refused to do her work, and that she hadn't completed her tasks. But Tom didn't seem to want to hear it. He just said, "We can't have one person carrying everyone else. You need to make sure you're not overstepping." After that, word spread around the office. Suddenly, people were giving me sideways glances. My other coworkers, who had always benefited from my willingness to help, started treating me like I was being uncooperative. Even our HR coordinator mentioned in passing that Kelly had expressed concerns about feeling unsupported. I tried talking to Kelly once more. Calmly, I said, "I've been helping you for months, and it's not sustainable. You need to start completing your own work." She smiled sweetly and said, "Wow, you've really changed. I thought we were friends." I guess I was wrong. From then on, she started excluding me from casual conversations, stopped asking for help entirely, and started subtly undermining me in team meetings. When I raised concerns to Tom again, he said I should try to be a team player. It's been 3 months since I stopped covering for her, and the office dynamic is tense. I'm constantly worried about being labeled difficult, but I also can't keep sacrificing my time and mental health. I've tried keeping a low profile, but the whispers continue. People I considered friends at work now avoid assigning tasks that involve me, or they quietly roll their eyes when I speak. I keep telling myself that I did the right thing. I was enabling Kelly by doing her work. She needed to face the consequences of her laziness, but it's hard not to feel isolated. I never wanted to be the villain, but apparently, refusing to be taken advantage of makes me one. Sometimes I wonder if I should just go back to my old ways. Finish her work, smile, and pretend everything is fine, just to keep the peace. But deep down, I know that would only make me resentful and exhausted. I've started applying to other jobs, trying to mentally prepare for a move, because I don't want to stay in an environment where boundaries are punished and laziness is rewarded. I guess my question is, am I really the bad guy here? Or is it normal to set limits and stop enabling someone? Because it sure feels like everyone at work thinks I am. Update. It's been about 6 months since I stopped covering for Kelly, and the situation has only escalated in ways I didn't expect. I thought things would settle once I drew my boundaries, but instead I became, as my coworkers quietly call me, the difficult one. After the initial fallout, I tried to focus on my own projects and avoid Kelly as much as possible. I stopped volunteering to help with anything outside of my responsibilities. For the first few weeks, it felt liberating. I could actually leave work on time and not think about correcting her mistakes. But then the office gossip started to catch up with me. A few co-workers, people I had considered friends, began subtly turning against me. In team meetings, my ideas were ignored or interrupted. People made small jokes about me being too strict or selfish. One co-worker, Lisa, 31F, who had often relied on me for guidance, said outright in a meeting, "Maybe some of us just work differently, and we shouldn't expect everything to be perfect." Everyone laughed. I wanted to crawl under the table. Kelly, meanwhile, started taking credit for things I'd originally done. She would present half-baked ideas in meetings, and when someone asked for clarification, she'd say, "Oh, I had help from narrator earlier." Even though I didn't confirm or deny, the damage was done. My manager, Tom, began asking me why I wasn't more involved in supporting the team. I tried explaining that I'd set boundaries, but it didn't help. Tom said, "Teamwork is about compromise. You can't just withdraw when things get hard." I reminded him that I'd spent months helping Kelly complete her responsibilities before setting these boundaries, but he seemed frustrated, like I'd gone too far. The hardest part is that my mental health took a hit. I started feeling anxious every morning before work, and I had trouble sleeping at night, replaying conversations in my head. I realized I was burning out again, not because of the workload, but because of the social pressure and the guilt everyone was trying to pile on me. Eventually, I decided to document everything. I started keeping emails, tracking projects, and noting instances where Kelly didn't complete her work. It felt exhausting, but it was necessary. I also started having private conversations with a few coworkers who seemed neutral, explaining my perspective. Some understood, but others quietly rolled their eyes and avoided me. One day, during a particularly tense meeting, Kelly made a comment that really hit me. She said, "It's funny how narrator acts like she's carrying the team on her back, but she's never willing to lend a hand anymore." I calmly replied, "I've been carrying extra work for months to help the team, but I'm no longer doing someone else's job for them. I expect everyone to contribute their part." There was an awkward silence, and Tom quickly moved on, but I could feel the tension radiating from everyone. Afterward, Lisa came over and whispered, "You're making waves, you know that, right?" I nodded. "I know I am, despite the tension. I don't regret my decision. I've been able to focus on my own responsibilities, and my performance has actually improved. I've met every deadline, received positive feedback from clients, and even got recognition from upper management for taking initiative on my own projects. But at the same time, it's clear that the office culture favors people who are easy to manipulate or who avoid confrontation. Like Kelly, I've started exploring other job opportunities. Part of me wants to stay and push through, but another part knows I don't want to be in an environment that punishes setting boundaries. I've even spoken to a career coach about strategies for leaving gracefully while protecting my reputation. In therapy, we've been talking a lot about assertiveness and self-respect. My therapist said something that resonated. Being the bad guy isn't always about morality. Sometimes it's about challenging the status quo. And I guess that's exactly what I did. I challenged the expectation that I should continue being exploited just to keep everyone happy. Honestly, I'm starting to feel less guilty about it. I'm learning that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being and career, even if others view it as selfish. And deep down, I know that if I had kept doing Kelly's work, I'd still be exhausted, stressed, and unappreciated. I still get side glances and passive-aggressive comments, but I've stopped letting them affect me. I focus on my own work, maintain my standards, and avoid unnecessary interactions with Kelly. She's still in the office, still coasting, still trying to subtly undermine me, but I've stopped reacting. and for the first time in months, I actually feel in control. I guess the lesson I'm learning is that sometimes standing up for yourself comes with social consequences, but those consequences are worth it if they protect your mental health and professional integrity. I'm not sure how long this phase will last. The office is small, and tensions have a way of simmering. But I've decided I won't compromise my boundaries again, no matter how much pressure is put on me. And while it's lonely at times, it's also freeing. Final update. It's been almost a year since I completely stopped covering for Kelly, and looking back, I can see how much the situation shaped not only my work life, but also my sense of self-respect and boundaries. It didn't end with dramatic confrontation or sweeping changes, but the slow, steady effects of standing up for myself have been profound. After that last update, things at the office got quieter, but not because everyone suddenly supported me. It was more like a tense truce. Kelly stopped asking for my help entirely, which meant she started either doing minimal work herself or quietly shifting tasks onto others who were easier to influence. I stopped reacting to it, but I kept careful records of any mistakes or unfinished tasks that impacted projects. I didn't want to be blindsided if management came looking for accountability. Tom, my manager, began observing more closely. Over the past few months, he started acknowledging my work in ways he hadn't before. During one team meeting, he said, "I want to recognize Narrator for consistently delivering on her projects and maintaining quality, even when resources are stretched." It was brief, but it felt like validation. Recognition for doing the right thing without compromising myself. Kelly tried a few times to undermine me, like sending incomplete drafts or giving me misleading information, but I stayed calm. I'd verify facts, correct errors professionally, and move on. Each time, her frustration became obvious. She would mutter to other coworkers, roll her eyes when I spoke in meetings, or try to insert little sarcastic comments. But because I stayed professional and didn't react emotionally, it only highlighted her behavior over time. Other coworkers started noticing the pattern too. Some even quietly expressed relief that someone finally refused to enable her. My relationship with the rest of the team improved slowly. People who had seen me constantly cover for Kelly started respecting my boundaries. Lisa, who had initially criticized me, came over a few months ago and said, "I get it now. You're not being selfish. You're just doing your job and making sure the rest of us do ours." That moment felt like a turning point. Subtle, but important, one unexpected outcome. I found myself mentoring other coworkers in a healthier way. Instead of taking on their tasks, I began teaching them to manage their workload efficiently. I realized that helping someone doesn't mean doing the work for them. It means equipping them with tools and guidance to succeed independently. That's the kind of mentorship I had been missing in my early years with Kelly. Personally, the stress and anxiety that had built up over months of being exploited started to dissipate. I sleep better now. I'm able to leave work at work, and I've begun pursuing a side project I've been passionate about for years. Freelance graphic design. It's rewarding in ways my day job sometimes isn't, and it reminds me that my skills and time are valuable outside the office as well. Interestingly, Kelly eventually approached me after a year, seemingly trying to make amends. She said she had been struggling with her workload and implied that I could help her now. I politely declined, sticking to the boundaries I'd set. She looked surprised, even annoyed, but I didn't waver. I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean enabling bad behavior. It means moving forward without resentment, but with clear limits. Tom eventually addressed the whole team about accountability and workload distribution. He explicitly referenced the importance of completing assigned tasks and not relying on others to fill in gaps. Without calling anyone out by name, it was clear the message was directed at patterns like Kelly's. The office culture subtly shifted after that, and while it's not perfect, it's healthier than it was before. Looking back, I see that the whole ordeal taught me invaluable lessons. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. I learned to distinguish between people who genuinely need help and those who exploit kindness. I learned that standing up for myself might make me seem like the bad guy to some, but in reality, it's a necessary step toward respect and balance. Most importantly, I discovered that my self-worth isn't tied to doing someone else's work or being liked by everyone. I can be professional, kind, and still protect my own time and energy. That realization has carried over into my personal life as well. I'm more assertive with friends, family, and even strangers when necessary. I feel more grounded and confident than I ever did when I was constantly overextending myself. So yes, some people at work initially saw me as the bad guy, but in the end, the only person whose opinion truly mattered was my own. And now, I can say with certainty that refusing to be exploited was one of the best decisions I've ever made, even if it ruffled feathers along the way. Stories number 11. I've been hiding from my best friend's mom for 15 years. I never thought I'd tell anyone this. Not because it's a huge crime, not because it's illegal, but because it feels too strange, too small to be believable. And honestly, I've been running from it for most of my adult life. But tonight, sitting in my apartment with my cat curled on my lap, I realized I've carried this secret long enough. My best friend's name is Madison, and I met her when I was 12. We bonded over horror movies, too much candy, and the kind of ridiculous dares only middle schoolers can come up with. We were inseparable from day one. But Madison had a secret weapon I couldn't compete with. Her mom, Debbie was the kind of person you couldn't ignore. She had this booming laugh that carried through the house. The kind of voice that made strangers in the grocery store smile even when they didn't know why. She made every parent-teacher conference feel like a party, and every school bake sale look like a festival. I adored her, and for reasons I still don't fully understand. She adored me back. It started small. At my first sleepover at Madison's house, Debbie kept bringing me snacks, insisting I take extra blankets, asking about my family like she genuinely cared. And I, naive and starved for attention, soaked it up then. The first incident happened. I was 13, and Madison had a sleepover for her birthday. Debbie offered us each a soda before bed. I took mine and I don't even remember what happened next. One thing led to another, and Debbie made me stay behind while the others went upstairs, and she whispered something I didn't understand at the time. Something that crossed a line. Something I can't explain fully without it sounding worse than it was, but let's just say it wasn't appropriate, and I didn't stop it. I froze. And then she smiled like nothing happened. Like it was a secret only between us. I didn't tell anyone. Because I didn't even understand it myself. I just internalized it. After that, I avoided sleepovers at Madison's whenever Debbie was home. I made excuses. I stayed at other friends' houses. I invented chores at home. By the time I was 15, I realized I was actively hiding from her. I even started skipping birthday parties and events she attended, all without telling Madison. It became easier as we got older. College, different states, jobs, relationships. Each time I came back home, I made sure to coincidentally avoid Debbie, taking different routes to Madison's house, never visiting during the day, never answering calls that might involve her. And here's the kicker, I never told Madison why. She just assumed I wasn't interested in visiting her mom, that I was busy, or that I preferred hanging out alone, and I never corrected her. For 15 years. I've kept this pattern going. I've seen Madison multiple times a year, coffee, brunch, holidays. But Debbie, I've avoided her completely. I've lurked on social media, watched her photos from afar, smiled at Madison's stories. Never letting her know that I see her. I can't explain why. Part of me is terrified of confrontation. Part of me is ashamed. And I think part of me is still trapped in that 13-year-old version of myself who didn't know how to say no. The strangest part? I haven't told a soul. Not my husband, not my therapist, not even Madison. I've kept this secret tucked in a corner of my brain that I revisit at night when no one is around. It eats at me sometimes, this guilt and shame. And yet the thought of ever confronting Debbie makes my stomach twist. I've thought about writing her a letter, explaining everything, but I don't even know if I could send it. I've thought about telling Madison, but that feels unfair to her. She doesn't deserve to carry this burden. Tonight, though, I realize something. I can't keep running forever. I can't keep letting a fear from my teenage years dictate how I live my adult life. I don't know if I'll ever see Debbie again. I don't know if I'll ever tell Madison the truth. But I do know this. The secret has had too much power over me for too long. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like I might be ready to face it, or at least ready to stop hiding. Because running hasn't protected me. It's only kept me small. Update. It's been about 2 months since I first typed out that post, and honestly, I didn't think I'd have the courage to actually do anything about it. But sometimes life has a way of forcing your hand. Madison invited me to a weekend brunch at her place. She said her husband, Greg, was going to be there, along with Debbie. Yes, Debbie, I almost canceled. My heart sank when I realized I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't keep avoiding her, pretending I wasn't terrified. I spent the week leading up to it overthinking everything. I wrote out different scenarios, pretend nothing happened, apologize vaguely, Confess everything. I practiced the polite smile and wave version in the mirror. Every night I fell asleep staring at the ceiling, my stomach in knots. The morning of the brunch, I took a long walk to calm myself. I reminded myself that Debbie had changed over the years. Maybe she wouldn't even remember the details. Maybe I was holding on to something from my teenage self that had no place in my adult life. When I arrived, Madison greeted me with her usual warmth. I hugged her tightly, feeling both comforted and guilty, and then Debbie appeared. She looked the same. Loud, vibrant, still larger than life. She hugged me, and I could feel the warmth, the affection that had always made me feel safe and seen, and small, all at once. I almost froze. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But instead, I smiled and said, "Hi, Debbie." "It's been a long time," she laughed. "It has. Too long." Her energy was infectious, and for a second I forgot why I was terrified. Throughout brunch, I tried to maintain calm, making small talk, nodding, laughing when appropriate. But there were moments when her eyes met mine, and I felt that old tension tighten in my chest. After everyone went inside to watch a movie, Debbie lingered outside on the porch with me. I knew this was it. The moment I couldn't avoid, I took a deep breath. "Debbie, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice trembling. I've been avoiding you for years, not Madison, not anyone else, just you. I didn't know how to deal with some things that happened when I was a teenager, and I let that fear control me." "I'm sorry." She looked at me, surprised, her brow furrowed, but there was no anger in her eyes, just curiosity. "You avoided me?" she asked gently. I nodded. "For 15 years I was scared. I didn't know how to confront it. I didn't know if I could ever face you, but I can't keep running. I needed you to know that." Debbie reached out and took my hand. "Honey, I had no idea. I never thought you felt that way. And I'm so sorry if I ever made you uncomfortable. You were always so brave and smart, and I see that now. You didn't owe me anything." I felt a weight lift off my chest. She didn't yell. She didn't judge. She just listened. And in that moment, I realized that the power my fear had over me for all these years was gone. We hugged, a long, awkward, healing hug. And when we pulled apart, she smiled. "I'm glad you're here. I missed you." Later, when Madison came out to see us talking, I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't need to explain anything to her yet. The first step was done. I had faced the person I had been hiding from for a decade and a half. That night I went home and cried in relief. Not shame, not fear, relief. Relief that I was no longer living in hiding. Relief that I could finally start rebuilding a relationship that had always had the potential for warmth instead of fear. I don't know how often I'll see Debbie from now on. Maybe once a month, maybe less. But I know one thing, I'm done running. I've finally taken my life back from the shadow I created in my own head. And it feels like breathing fresh air for the first time. Final update. It's been 5 years since I first admitted to myself, and to the internet, that I'd been hiding from Debbie for 15 years. Time has a strange way of smoothing out the edges of fear, and looking back now, I can barely remember how heavy it felt to avoid her. Madison and I are closer than ever. Life has taken us through so many changes. She got a promotion at work, moved into a new condo, and married Greg. I've seen her grow into this incredible, confident woman, and I'm proud in a way that doesn't make me compare or shrink. She's still my best friend, but now our friendship feels balanced, equal, and honest. Debbie has become a part of my life in a way I never thought possible. After that first brunch confrontation, we slowly started rebuilding our relationship. At first, it was small things, checking in over text, sharing photos of her grandkids. Madison and Greg have 2 now, Olivia and Ethan, and occasional coffee dates when she visited town. It wasn't always easy. There were awkward silences, moments when old tension threatened to resurface, and times I caught myself slipping into fear again. But Debbie always met me with patience. She never pressured, never judged, just let me navigate the relationship at my own pace. 2 years ago, I attended a family reunion with Madison, Greg and the kids. Debbie insisted I come along, and at first I hesitated. My stomach twisted at the thought of being around all those relatives who had been part of my teenage memories. But I went, and it was beautiful. Debbie introduced me as my second daughter, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel that warmth without guilt. Olivia and Ethan took to me immediately, tugging at my hand and showing me drawings and toys. I laughed so hard that day, and for once, I didn't feel like a girl hiding from the world. I felt like I belonged. Over the past year, Debbie and I have even started talking about the past openly. She's never excused what happened, and I've never shied away from admitting how scared I was. But the strange thing is that these conversations don't make the past heavier. They make it lighter. They allow us to acknowledge it, own it, and leave it behind without letting it define us. Madison once said to me, "Mom, do you realize how lucky you are? Most people don't get a second chance with someone like her." I nodded. But I also realized that I had given myself a second chance too. I had spent 15 years hiding from Debbie, but I had spent another 5 learning that fear doesn't have to control my life. Last week, we went on a weekend trip together. Debbie, Madison, the kids, and me. We stayed in a small cabin by a lake, cooked meals together, played board games, and stayed up late talking. At one point, Debbie pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm proud of you. You faced something you couldn't face as a teenager, and you never let it make you bitter. That's rare." I felt tears prick my eyes. I wanted to tell her everything, that for 15 years I had carried fear, shame, and guilt, that I had watched her from a distance, that I had questioned myself constantly. But instead I just hugged her and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me." She laughed. The same booming, vibrant laugh I remembered from my childhood. And for the first time I truly felt free. I don't think I'll ever forget those 15 years of hiding, but I also don't think I'll ever let them hold me hostage again. I've learned that fear can be overcome, that relationships can be rebuilt, and that sometimes the people you avoid most are the ones who can teach you the most about courage, forgiveness, and love. I'm not the same person I was at 12, at 13, at 20, and Debbie isn't either. We're different, wiser, and stronger. And somehow, we've found our way to each other again. Sometimes, when I look back, I almost laugh at how ridiculous it all was. 15 years of running, 15 years of shadows, and now, I can walk into her house, sit at her kitchen table, and feel like I'm home. For the first time in my life, I can say that without shame, without fear, and without looking over my shoulder. I faced my past, I faced her, and I survived, and in doing so, I finally found peace. Stories number 12. My brother and his wife used my bedroom when I wasn't home. When I bought my house 2 years ago, I never imagined I'd have to kick my own brother out of it. It's a modest 3-bedroom place just outside of Denver. Nothing fancy, but it's mine and I worked hard for it. I'm 32, single, and I'd been saving for years to get out of renting. The place was my pride and joy, and for a while, it actually felt like a dream. Then my brother Caleb called me one night saying he and his wife Lauren were in a tough spot. He'd lost his job at a logistics company, and they were struggling to keep up with rent. They asked if they could stay with me, just for a couple of months, while he got back on his feet. Of course I said yes. Caleb's my little brother, 3 years younger, always been kind of the charming screw-up of the family. I figured it'd be temporary. They could stay in the guest room, chip in a bit for groceries, and that'd be it. The first few weeks went fine. They were polite, helped with chores, and even cooked dinner a few nights. But then slowly, little things started feeling off. At first, it was small stuff. My bed looked weirdly wrinkled when I'd come home from work. Once, my comforter was folded differently than I leave it. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I didn't make it as neatly that morning. Or my cat had jumped up there. But I don't let my cat in my room during the day. And when it happened again, I knew something wasn't right. Then one afternoon, I came home earlier than usual because of a canceled meeting. When I walked in, I heard laughter, Caleb's voice and Lauren's, coming from upstairs. I assumed they were in the guest room, but as I got closer, I realized the door they were behind wasn't theirs. It was mine. I froze for a second, completely confused before pushing the door open. They were both in bed, my bed, not doing anything sexual, thank God. But lying there under my comforter, watching Netflix on my TV like it was totally normal. Lauren sat up fast, her face going red. Caleb looked like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar. He stammered, "Oh, hey, we were just, the guest room TV wasn't working." I just stood there for a second, then said, "Are you kidding me right now? You couldn't sit on the couch downstairs? You had to lie in my bed?" Lauren started mumbling apologies, but Caleb brushed it off, saying it was no big deal. That set me off. I told them it was my room, and it's not okay to just make themselves comfortable in it like that. They got defensive, Caleb said. "We didn't think you'd care. You're barely home, man. It's just a bed." That made me furious. It's not just a bed, it's my space. You wouldn't like it if I started lying in your bed, would you? Lauren looked genuinely embarrassed, but Caleb doubled down. He said I was overreacting, and that he thought family shares stuff. I told him that's not sharing. It's disrespect. The argument ended with them both going quiet and retreating to the guest room. I was too angry to even talk about it after that. So I went out for a drive to cool off. When I came back later that night, the house felt tense. Caleb barely looked at me, and Lauren kept apologizing in that quiet, guilty tone that just made it worse. I thought maybe that'd be the end of it. They'd learned their lesson. But a week later, I noticed something else. My closet door was slightly open. I never leave it that way. Inside, a few of my shirts were on different hangers, and my cologne bottle had been moved. It felt invasive, like someone had been snooping. I didn't say anything right away. I just started locking my bedroom door whenever I left. A few days after that, Caleb asked me if I had an extra key to the garage. I told him no, because I knew exactly what he was really asking. If I had a spare key to my room that night, I texted my best friend Megan about it, and she told me I should set up a camera or something just to see if they were crossing the line again. I didn't love the idea, but curiosity and irritation won out. I set up a small security camera app on my old phone and aimed it at my bedroom door. The next day, I left for work as usual. When I came home, everything looked normal, but when I checked the footage later that night, there it was. Around noon, Caleb unlocking my door with something, probably a butter knife or bobby pin, and walking in. A few minutes later, Lauren followed. They were in there for almost an hour. I felt sick watching it. They didn't steal anything, but they went through my dresser drawers, sprayed my cologne, and laid on my bed like it was theirs. That night, I confronted them again, this time with the video. Caleb went pale and started stumbling over his words. Lauren burst into tears. I told them flat out they needed to leave. Caleb begged me not to kick them out, said they didn't have anywhere to go, and that it wasn't what it looked like. I said it looked exactly like what it was. They were invading my privacy, and I wasn't comfortable living with them anymore. Lauren kept apologizing through tears, saying she'd never do it again, but my trust was completely gone. I gave them 2 weeks to move out. Caleb called me heartless, accused me of turning my back on family, and tried to guilt me into letting them stay longer. But I didn't budge. When they finally moved out, the silence that followed felt like relief and grief rolled into one. Caleb didn't speak to me for months. My mom called me cold and said I should have handled it privately, like I hadn't tried that the first time. But here's the thing, I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted my home to feel safe again. I bought that house to have a space that was mine, not a place where I had to guard my own room like a stranger. It's been 8 months now. Caleb and I have talked once, briefly. At our dad's birthday dinner, it was awkward but civil. Lauren apologized again, quietly, and I told her I appreciated it. But I couldn't go back to pretending nothing happened. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted. Maybe I could have been more patient. But every time I walk into my bedroom, close the door behind me, and feel that quiet sense of ownership, I know I made the right choice. Some people don't get that boundaries aren't just about rules. They're about respect. Once someone shows you they don't understand that, it's nearly impossible to live under the same roof, and honestly, I don't care if that makes me the bad guy in my family's eyes. I'd rather have my peace than keep the kind of relationship where I have to hide my own house keys. It's been about 6 months since Caleb and Lauren moved out, and I've had a lot of time to process everything. At first, the apartment felt almost too quiet. I was used to someone always being around, even if it was annoying or stressful. Now the silence was comforting, but it also gave me time to replay every moment of that last year in my head. The first thing I did after they left was change every lock in the house. Bedroom, front door, garage. I also got a small safe for anything valuable and invested in a better security system. I didn't want to feel powerless again, and for a while, I obsessed over making sure my home felt mine. It sounds paranoid, but I learned the hard way how quickly a lack of boundaries can be abused. I also started thinking a lot about Caleb and Lauren themselves. Part of me felt sad for them. It's not easy to be in a tough financial spot and feel desperate for stability. I understand that. But I realized that desperation doesn't give someone the right to violate your space repeatedly. They crossed a line, and it wasn't just a one-time mistake. The fact that I caught them in my bedroom twice, and that they went through my things, meant they weren't respecting me or my home. I decided to sit down and write Caleb a letter. I didn't send it at first. I just wrote everything out. How I felt when I saw them in my bedroom, how violated I felt, and why I couldn't let that continue. Writing it was cathartic. It helped me put words to the anger, the disappointment, and the lingering hurt. After a few drafts, I felt calmer. I realized I didn't need him to understand or apologize for me to feel better. Setting boundaries and protecting my space was enough. A couple of months after they left, I ran into Caleb at a family event. It was awkward. He didn't know whether to hug me or shake my hand, and I stayed distant. He tried small talk, work, the new apartment, his dog, but I kept it short. I didn't want to get drawn into defending my actions or explaining myself again. I just nodded, smiled politely, and moved on. It felt strange not to be the cool older sister he could lean on. But honestly, I was okay with it. My peace mattered more. Living alone again has been incredible. I've set up my bedroom exactly the way I want it, with new bedding, a desk, and a reading corner. I even started a small herb garden on my balcony. My home finally feels like a sanctuary, not just a place to crash. Every time I close my bedroom door, I feel this calm that I haven't felt in years. It's a constant reminder that I get to control my space and enforce boundaries. I've also reconnected with my friends more intentionally. I realized I spent a lot of the past year tiptoeing around my own home and worrying about what Caleb and Lauren might do next. Now, I make sure my social life is balanced, and I host small get-togethers at my apartment. I feel safe letting people in again because I trust the boundaries I've put in place. Interestingly, this whole experience has made me think about family dynamics and personal responsibility. I love my brother, but I also see that love doesn't mean letting someone disrespect you repeatedly. Protecting your space and your mental health isn't selfish, it's necessary. I know now that if someone doesn't respect your home or your boundaries, no amount of reasoning or guilt-tripping will fix it. I still haven't spoken to Lauren since they moved out, and I don't think I will. Caleb and I exchange occasional messages now, usually about logistics or family events, but it's strictly surface level. There's no resentment boiling over anymore. It's just quiet acceptance. We can coexist in the family without recreating the chaos of the past. Sometimes I think about the what-ifs. What if I'd let them stay indefinitely? What if I hadn't installed cameras? What if I'd ignored the red flags? But then I remind myself, every choice I made was about protecting myself. And that, more than anything, is worth it. I've also noticed a shift in how I interact with people in general. I'm more assertive about my boundaries now, friends, co-workers, even acquaintances. I don't let small invasions slide anymore. I know now that early enforcement prevents bigger problems later. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I've internalized it. In the end, the experience was rough, but it taught me the value of self-respect, boundaries, and personal space. Caleb and Lauren were important parts of my life, but their behavior made me realize that some relationships, even family ones, have limits. Protecting your home, your comfort, and your peace isn't optional. It's essential, and honestly, for the first time in a long time, I feel like my home is truly mine. I can finally relax without worry, and that alone makes everything I went through worth it. It's been over a year since Caleb and Lauren moved out, and I finally feel like I can reflect on everything without my chest tightening. The house is completely mine now, and I've settled into a routine that feels stable and peaceful. My bedroom is exactly how I want it. New sheets, my favorite blankets, a desk in the corner, and little touches that make it feel like a sanctuary rather than just a place to sleep. Every time I close the door behind me, I feel calm and protected, which is something I hadn't felt in over a year. I've also noticed how much this experience has changed me. I'm more aware of boundaries, and I enforce them without guilt. I don't let people overstep my space anymore. Whether it's friends borrowing something without asking, or coworkers trying to intrude on my personal life, I realized that the stress and anxiety I felt while Caleb and Lauren were living with me weren't about them specifically. They were about me not asserting what I needed. Now I assert it immediately, and it's liberating. Caleb and I have reconnected, but it's very cautious. We text occasionally about family matters or events, and it's civil, but the closeness we had before is gone. I think both of us understand that some things can't be undone, and that's okay. Lauren, as far as I know, hasn't tried to contact me again, and I don't anticipate that happening. I've even started hosting friends at the house more often. Before, I was hesitant to let anyone stay over because I was still nervous someone might violate my space. But now, I feel confident that my boundaries are respected, and I can enjoy my home without anxiety. I've had a few friends crash on the couch for game nights or weekend visits, and it's been fun to share my space without feeling like I'm at risk. One of the biggest changes, though, has been how I approach family dynamics. I love my brother, and I always will. But I've accepted that love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Setting boundaries with family is just as important as setting them with strangers. It was painful to realize that enforcing my rules might make me the bad guy in my family's eyes. But I've come to understand that prioritizing my mental health and safety isn't selfish. It's necessary. I also had a long conversation with my mom recently. She admitted she didn't understand why I had to be so firm at first, but said she now sees how much it affected me at the time. She apologized for putting pressure on me to be nicer to Caleb and Lauren, and that felt like a small weight lifting off my shoulders. Even though the past can't be changed, it feels good to have her acknowledgement. The house feels like a fresh start now. I've painted walls, added new furniture, and even started a small herb garden on the balcony. Every time I walk through the front door, it feels like my space, not a place where I have to constantly guard myself. I've come to cherish the quiet, the freedom to relax, and the control I have over my environment. Honestly, I think the whole experience taught me a lot about myself. I learned how to identify when someone is disrespecting my boundaries, how to enforce them calmly but firmly, and how to protect my peace without feeling guilty. Caleb and Lauren's behavior was disappointing and stressful, but it also forced me to grow in ways I didn't expect. I've also learned to forgive in my own way. I don't dwell on anger or resentment anymore. I've accepted that Caleb made mistakes, Lauren made mistakes, and I had to make hard decisions to protect myself. The past year has been about reclaiming my home, my peace of mind, and my sense of control. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. My house is my sanctuary. My bedroom is my private space. I can sleep, relax, and live freely. I've built a life here that's safe, comfortable, and fully mine. That sense of ownership and peace is worth everything I went through to get here. I don't hate Caleb or Lauren. I just understand that some lessons come the hard way. Boundaries aren't optional, and respect is non-negotiable. I've finally reached a point where I feel confident, secure, and happy in my home, and that, more than anything, makes me feel like I came out of this stronger and wiser.